Thank you, everyone, and welcome. I call the June 17th, 2024 special board meeting to order. It is 6:04 p.m. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call roll.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Dr. Hoig. Here. Ms. Willis. Dr. Worley. Here. Ms. Hammer-Rowland. Here. Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessup Binger.
Here, and we do have a quorum this evening. At special board meetings, it is generally not the practice that the board will take public comment. This evening, because we have an action item, I wanted to see if there might be a motion to allow 30 minutes of public comment this evening from one of my board colleagues. That would necessitate a motion, a second, and a vote from minimum of 4 board members to move forward with a public comment for 30 minutes.
So moved.
Sorry.
Go for
Mr.
a
Meyer.
second.
Just, you did change your change.
Any board comment or questions on allowing public comments? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoig.
Yes.
Ms. Willis. Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Hammer-Rowland. Yes. Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Binger.
Yes. I'll read our public comment statement. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Mr. Morris is at the ready to provide a 3-minute timer and about a 30-second kind of reminder of when you're at that point. And Dr. Hoig is going to do the overall 30-minute timing for us to keep us on track. Is there any public comment in the room this evening?
Hello, thank you for providing public comment. Deb Falk-Pellick. I have comments about the terminology in the facilities referendum language. I understand it was changed a bit this afternoon. So at first it talked about ADA access compliance capital projects. And myself and colleagues were wondering what the heck that means. Then it was changed to ADA facility standards capital project. What does that mean? I'm hoping the board asks for a definition of that. Was this meant to say the U.S. Department of Justice 2010 standards for accessible design? If so, then let's put it that way because this is a legal document and we don't want this confusion. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, as a governmental entity, the Wauwatosa School District is required to do a self-evaluation. Thank you for doing that and completing that in all the schools. I'd like to suggest that the board legal counsel refers to section 35.150 of the Code of Federal Regulations regarding the transition plan. Where is the transition plan for the Wauwatosa School District? We're under a 20-year referendum right now, approved in 2018, where language in that referendum question said ADA updates. So somebody had to have figured out what those ADA updates were back before the community was asked to approve the 2018 referendum. Where's that language? Where are we at with completing those things? What have we done so far? I think the community needs to know that before we start asking for other issues or other items. I'd also like to, if we're to have further specification in if there's going to, the referendum question on facilities, perhaps linking that somehow to this report entitled the 2023 ADA Facility Assessment, so that there's accountability in this district for what we're spending the money on. And I know I spoke with Lynn about this during a policy committee meeting. We have to stop clumping ADA with any project. The best example of this was that $55,000 office remodel, where on the capital projects report, it said office remodel /ADA. what was the
30 seconds.
ADA compliance issue? There wasn't one. So in order to make sure we're not being disingenuous with these items, we need to spell out exactly what is going to happen and the transition plan gets done. Because we have the same architecture firm, PRA, who did all of the assessments back in 2018 for that referendum and has done them for this one as well. There certainly should be a transition plan. This is not has not been asked for before.
Time.
So those are the comments I have. Thank you.
I'm BJ Ermans, Commissioner with the Wauwatosa Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and I live at 2749 North 75th Street. If that's not needed, sorry, I sometimes go before the city council and I figure better to have it than not need it. So I want to first thank you for all of the efforts that went into so many of you, the staff, the administration, board support people, everyone into the listening sessions and the openness with which discussions were taking place. It really was an excellent idea, and I feel as though a lot of people appreciated that opportunity one-on-one. So, or one on a few, all I do want to state, and I'm disappointed that this did not make it into the report, that one egregious missing item was a virtual session for people who are not able to come in person. That not only dismisses people with disabilities, but a large number of parent families and guardian families who do not have the ability to always get a caregiver in to feed their kids supper. They might not have two cars if there's two people there. They might be working two jobs. It is very hard. And there is, yes, they can look at a recording. But that element of live and being able to say, here's my question, and that it is so valuable. So I mentioned that as missing in two places. The ADA is mentioned in the referendum and a few spots in the document. One thing that I find interesting was, yes, you were responsive to feedback about ADA requirements for people coming. However, I find it hard to believe that no one within the administration, on the board, or from the consultants realized anything or thought about people with disabilities at all when choosing the original locations. At least that's the way it appeared. And I also ask that it is a shame that the ADA requirements have to be on another referendum. And I ask you to be sure that you consider a plan B. If the referendum doesn't pass, how are you going to address all of the ADA inequities? And I do second a lot of the things that Deb said. It was in 2018, so I'm not going to believe it just because you say it on the referendum. It was on the referendum in 2018 and it didn't get done. So I will hope, but I'm not sure. So I thank you all again for all you do.
Good evening. My name is Chris Bauer. I'm a resident on Knoll Terrace and a parent of Eisenhower students. Last week, I executed on a promise to brief the school board on the success of Eisenhower during the 23-24 school year. This week, I'd like to reframe the thinking of the board and the community on the decision to use the fund balance to address crisis points flaring across the district over the past 3 years. It was mentioned by the school board that it felt that the referendum was being forced upon us like a gun to our heads, indicating that either we need to pass the operating referendum or face dramatic cuts to our program. The implication was that we should have gone to referendum years ago. I absolutely agree with that member. We should have gone to referendum years ago. I would suggest that we should have done it in 2011 when we started feeling the pain of a budget that was not only not adjusted to inflation, but also a 5% funding cut in 2009, 2010. I agree with that member that we should have never found ourselves in this position, but here we are with the value of the state funding at approximately 80% of what we had in 2009. While I may be tempted to throw shade at the prior school boards for not doing what I think they should have, I believe they did their best. For us in 2024, the best thing that they did was preserve and even grow the fund balance, and thank the stars that they did. That said, I suggest this frame of reference. In using the fund balance, we were able to try solutions before we invested significant additional tax dollars into them. We brought in a new superintendent and took him for a test drive. What can this guy do? Can you reverse the trends happening because the state legislature keeps underfunding our district? What sort of resources will he need to do this? Is investing additional tax dollars actually going to fix the problem of slipping test scores and increasing behavioral issues? Thank the stars that we were able to use that fund balance in a safe way, because wouldn't you know it, Means was able to assemble a team that knows what they're doing. In the first year of a significant drop in the fund balance, Eisenhower has had a near complete reversal in every negative trend. Whitman and West have also seen significant drops in their behavioral problems. This system, when funded appropriately, works. We took it for a test drive and kicked the tires, and now we know exactly what we're buying with the referendum. Thus, my charge to the school board is the same as it's always been. Figure out what's best for the kids in our care, ask for what you need, set us up for success, not just in the next 5 years, but in the next 50. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to we've got one hand up online. You're welcome to come on up to the microphone. We'll go with the individual who's online, and then we'll come back and take the rest of our comments from the room. Thanks for your patience.
Forgive the pronunciation if it's incorrect. Robert Rishke, you have the microphone.
Yes, I just had a question to ask. I know we did you sent out a fairly comprehensive survey to Wauwatosa residents. I want to say it was back in February or maybe the beginning of March. And I was wondering if the results from that survey have been published or if there's been a board meeting that's been devoted to the results of that survey.
Yes and yes.
Okay. Has that happened already?
Yes.
Okay. I must have missed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Means filled in a blank there. We believe that the date on that was May 9th of this year. That is recorded and would be available on our district YouTube channel. All that information, I suspect, is also available on board docs for that date. And all the information, no doubt, is also kind of probably findable on the 2075 Task Force website. I know as a board member, I've gotten so much information. I'm not sure where everything is. A lot of it at this point is printed off in binders for me. But May 9th.
That was the night where the board had a chance to debrief the data with Rob from School Perceptions, and they went over the survey results with you.
Yep. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Derek Gottlieb. I live at 72nd in Wisconsin. I have a 3-year-old who's not currently in the schools yet, obviously. I'm also a professor of education. I study education policy. I've been following the community conversations and poring over the reports, and I want to offer 2 points to reframe the way we think about referendums to fund operating costs in particular. It sucks that in 1993, we decided that $11,000 per pupil was good enough for our kids. That figure was our own choice. It wasn't handed down to us by the state, and it isn't some piece of revelation about what education ought to cost in our community always and forever. We chose it, and we can choose to override it as conditions change and costs rise. However, the 1993 revenue limit legislation took away the most obvious and ordinary means that local jurisdictions have to raise revenues. That's why we have to use referendums regularly in order to do the basic work of keeping up with costs. And local jurisdictions everywhere in the state have had to raise additional revenues like this. It's not just us, and it's certainly not this or that particular spending decision that the district has made in the recent past. The state implemented revenue limits at the same time as it said, don't worry, we'll pick up the tab for rising costs. It took less than a decade for the state to go back on its word. Costs continue to go up, the state continues to pull back, and local communities have only one mechanism by which to make up the difference: a referendum. The good news for us in this district is that we can afford to pick up the slack. Not every district is so lucky. Every Wisconsin district has the same proverbial gun to its head, but we have the wherewithal to bear the cost. The referendum questions are only asking us to say yes to funding ourselves. And I want to stress that it really is ourselves all inclusively too. Every single school board seat is going to go up for election before this referendum money runs out. It's not a referendum on a particular plan exactly to be carried out by particular people exactly. It's not a vote to end the conversations that we have been having. It's a vote to be able to make real choices for the right reasons, rooted in our shared aspirations rather than our individual anxieties about the direction of public education in our community. In short, the referendum is a vote to take the gun from our own heads so we can get on with the day-to-day work of figuring out together what we want from our schools and how to provide it. We don't want to count on the state to get its act together? Fine. We don't want to use open enrollment to subsidize our enviable class sizes anymore?
30
Makes no
seconds.
sense to me, but fine. Then we have to pay up ourselves, and a referendum is the only way to do it. To the school board members, I would simply say, ask us for the amount of money that it takes to provide the education that you've heard us all say that we want for our kids, and then let us say yes to ourselves. Thank you.
That's a tough act to follow. John Etter, district resident, district parent, and teacher at East High for 17 years. And I'm here tonight to voice my support for both the facilities and the operating referendums that you'll be voting on tonight. I hope that they have the support of every member of the school board and anyone in the room and anyone who is viewing this on at home, either now or later. As the previous speaker very eloquently pointed out, for around 15 years now, the state legislature has been failing in its constitutional duty to adequately fund public education. And we have reached a point where we, like almost every other district, maybe every other district, I haven't done the full research, has to go to referendum to continue to offer our children an adequate public education. I would say an excellent public education, because that's what we have provided for as long as I have been here, and we will continue to provide. But the further and further we fall behind in funding that, the harder and harder that becomes. If there is anybody who has not had the chance to watch the district video with the district plan, I encourage you to do that. You can see what rough shape many of our facilities are in. So you can look at the shot of a bucket hanging from a ceiling, catching the water that is leaking through that. And I do not know, and I'm probably better not knowing, how much of our buildings are currently being held together by duct tape. Probably more than any of us are comfortable with. So we need to upgrade our facilities. So we need to maintain them, not even upgrade, just maintain them. Beyond that, as far as the operational part goes, we need to adequately fund district staff. So we have, historically, we have paid our employees, myself included, sorry to complain, fairly lowly. When I came here in 2007, I took a pay cut. So, and it took me around a decade, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, to finally make what I made in Sheboygan when I left there it's around 10 years before that. So I had to be a 20-year teacher to make what I was making when I was a 10-year teacher. And I know that over the years, many teachers have left. Almost every single one that I've talked to, pay was a major factor, if not the sole motivating factor. So let's invest in our school district, which is really the beating heart of this community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Chastity Burmeyer. I live at 150 North 85th. I'm a parent of a rising second and fifth grade student in the district. I'm a volunteer for Support Our Schools TOSA, which advocates for statewide school funding, and also was a member of the Strategic Planning Committee several years ago. I just wanted to take the opportunity to share with the community who might be listening in tonight that SOS last summer spent in-person advocacy efforts at the Capitol trying to get our state to fund schools, to use that $7 billion budget surplus that they had to correct the chronic underfunding of our schools. And unfortunately, they did not do that. So now we are stuck filling in that gap. And it's frustrating as a taxpayer, as a community member. But the alternative is to not provide our children and our future. And if you don't have children in the community, to provide an education that will help them to rise into good community members and enriched people who can advocate and really put TOSA on the map. I would encourage community members to turn some of this frustration into state advocacy efforts, because without this problem, we wouldn't be here this evening. I want to express my support of the referenda. I want our teachers who mentor and invest in our children to feel appreciated, both in terms of salary and just in terms of academic and behavioral supports that, as previously mentioned, have made such a huge difference in our success. And we are in a positive trajectory, and I want to see that continue as a parent. As a strategic planning committee member, education or school programming that lacks band and orchestra in elementary, world language, at least at the secondary level, access to vocational programming in high school, all of those things that round out our students. An education without that is absolutely not what the committee envisioned for our future. And so I just ask you as board members to say yes and allow the community to kind of follow and fill that state gap. I also want to thank the administration for all of the data and the listening sessions, the connection with the community, the transparency. I think that has been really important in this process to understanding how we arrived at these recommendations today. I wanted to thank the members of the TOSA 2075 task force, because that was a huge endeavor. And although our options are not great, are not comfortable, I really trust that you will be able to continue to move us forward. Thank you.
My name is Catherine Hudson. I'm a TOSA East graduate. I'm the parent of 4 children, 3 of whom are school age and attend Washington. I'm the PTA president there, and I'm an educator myself. I'm here tonight to encourage the board to put both of the referenda that the district has asked for on the ballot in November. Feels a little redundant to say this, but I think it cannot be emphasized enough that the current funding crisis we are facing is not a TOSA problem. School districts across our state are staring down the same grave decisions as Wauwatosa. The state of Wisconsin has continually failed our public schools and our students. Year after year, they have failed to provide adequate funding, forcing districts to begin to make spending cuts. For years, Wauwatosa quietly did this. Previous school boards and district administrators were faced with this tough choice and chose to stay within the constraints imposed by our state legislature rather than to go to our local tax base and ask for additional funding. Our teachers went underpaid, curriculum was not updated, professional learning for staff was neglected, and so the social emotional needs of our students went unmet. Our current district administrators are working hard to right the ship, to hire the people and purchase the resources needed to provide the educational experience our students deserve. Our data shows that these investments have paid off and have had positive results. Behavior incidents are down and test scores are up. As a community, we must make investments through an operational referendum in order to continue to see these results. Like other districts across the state, Wauwatosa has also had to forego maintenance of our aging facilities. The 2018 referendum was never meant to be the end-all be-all. It was always meant to be the first in a series of phases. We now have an administration offering a well-defined, comprehensive, long-term facilities plan, a plan that requires us to initially invest money in the most basic of deferred maintenance needs, For example, the updates to meet ADA standards. All students deserve the dignity of accessing the same bathrooms and classrooms and playground spaces as their peers. Our schools are also community spaces where all residents should be able to meet and gather without accessibility barriers. A capital referendum is necessary to provide safe and adequate learning spaces for students and our community. TOSA residents value our neighborhood schools and recognize the need for investment. I believe this to be true. I urge you to vote to put these onto the onto the ballot in November because strong schools equate to a strong community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final public comments in the room? Seeing none, we will close public comment for this evening. Thank you all very much for coming and sharing your thoughts tonight. We will now move into our agenda point on presentation to the Board of Education on the listening and engagement sessions report by the Donovan Group. Outstanding. We are joined this evening by Brian Nickel from the Donovan Group.
Good evening, everyone. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Great. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you this evening. My goal tonight is to provide an overview of the full report, which is in your board materials. And I understand the board has a robust agenda and discussion ahead of you tonight. So my goal will be to be brief. However, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. In summary, the board listening and engagement sessions were hosted in order to gather input for board decision-making. As Dr. Means has said in prior board meetings, one of 4 sets of data that will support board decision-making as it looks to the future of the district. We secured feedback from community members in attendance 3 different ways. We asked them to complete a written exit ticket answering 2 focus questions. They were also able to complete that same exit ticket online, and the majority chose to use that approach. And then finally, the administrative team, who was in attendance, filled out a reflection form at the end of each of the 3 sessions, and that formed our set of qualitative data that is included in the report. The sessions were held on May 20th, May 28th, and June 5th at 3 different school sites. And we used an open house format to allow individuals to have small group conversations, one-on-one conversations with board members. And we'll talk a little bit about the changes in the format between meetings 1 and 2. So session 1 was held at Longfellow Middle School. It was attended by 72 community members, as well as the Wauwatosa School District Administration. The 3 board members in attendance that night were Dr. Hoig, Ms. Heimer Rowland, and Dr. Jessup Anger. Session 2 was May 28th. That was moved to Underwood based on feedback both from community members in attendance and from administration. At that meeting, there were 41 community members, and the board members representing Wauwatosa at that event were Dr. Worley and Dr. Jessup Anger. And session 3 was Wednesday, June 5th. That location was also changed to Lincoln Elementary. I was attended by 34 community members. The board members in attendance, Dr. Jessup Anger, Dr. Worley, and Ms. Willis. The themes from these 3 sessions are shared here in order of frequency. So the main theme listed first was the theme mentioned most frequently, both by participants and by the administrators in reflection. Transparency and communication was mentioned, and it was mentioned most often with the tone of forward-looking. Transparency and communication as the board seeks to move forward about the options it's considering, about the solutions. As we think of a potential referendum in Wauwatosa, we think of those things as defining the need, defining a process, and defining a solution. The board has done significant work both through the 2075 task force and through these listening sessions and others, including the survey, to both communicate the need, communicate a process, and how the board moves forward to consider potential solutions. So transparency and communication around those ideas are important. The second most frequent theme was event format and logistics. There was significant feedback about the acoustic challenges in Longfellow after the first meeting, and we were able to make some adjustments both in terms of the location of the second and third meeting and in terms of the format to better meet the needs of the participants. Support for specialty schools was a theme that emerged. There was strong advocacy for both a Montessori school and the WSTEM school. Also, as well, programming as it relates to USTEM in the third meeting was evident. And mostly when folks were raising questions or having conversations about specialty schools, they wanted some level of assurance for continued support for those schools and for those programs. Equity and academic support was a common theme at all three meetings, and both in terms of the programming and curriculum investments that the district makes, but also using facilities to help students reach their potential. As mentioned earlier, STEM programming concerns were a highlight of the third meeting, particularly as it relates to the USTEM program. What was unique about that is there was news released by the district on the day of that meeting. So folks received that news from the district, came out to the meeting to learn more and to ask questions. Referendum and financial clarity, both looking backward in terms of prior referendum and looking forward. People wanted to understand more the nuance of operating referendum questions as opposed to the clarity of a bond or borrowing for facilities referendum. And people wanted to learn more and ask in greater detail about the implications of potentially moving forward with referendum questions on their own personal property taxes. There was strong support for the district's ongoing use of a strategic plan and long-term facilities plan to guide future decisions. And as some of the different breakout sessions of these listening sessions were held, the interconnectedness of facilities, transportation, and finance was a common theme in feedback and in questions. Community engagement and trust was listed as a theme. As noted, past projects were both noted specifically in 2018 and less specifically generally, with calls for looking forward, clear communication, detailed visuals when available to communicate potential changes. And always, as the district has been doing and would continue to do, requests for transparency regarding enrollment, numbers, and process and facility impacts as the district moves forward. And lastly, leadership and staffing was a theme, whether it was specific to specialty schools or acknowledging the work of Dr. Means and his team in leading the change moving forward for the district, having dedicated spaces for staffing discussions. That potentially could imply how those potential operational dollars would be used to support staffing, salaries, and benefits. And then just the value of having experienced leaders in the school district. That represents the main themes from the different feedback sources. Briefly talking about event format reflections. After initial planning, we presented the concept to the board, made some adjustments from the initial plan. And then after the first meeting in session one, made some significant changes both to format and made different locations available for 2 and 3 as it related to feedback from community members and staff members relating to ADA standards and accessibility. Lastly, we invited board members to both make opening and closing remarks in sessions 2 and 3, and had a brief Q&A session at the end of each of those that was well received both by participants and by community members who attended. So in closing, before I open to any questions you may have, just wanted to share appreciation for Dr. Means, Ms. Ellis, and the leadership team for their attendance at the meetings, the board members who are in attendance as well. Grateful for Mr. Price and his technology team for pivoting with us as we changed the format for meetings 2 and 3. The equipment worked very well and added to the experience of the visitors. And lastly, the student door monitors, and especially those who were helping with wayfinding at Longfellow. Always grateful for their help in the events running smoothly. With that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Questions and comments from my colleagues on the board? Mr. Nickel, I am seeing approximately no questions or comments from my colleagues on the board. I know you did a high-level overview with us tonight. We've received also a several-page document in preparation for the meeting that I think is available on board docs for the community to review as well, gathering all the data and themes. Anything else from the board? If not, Mr. Nickel, we will thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you for the opportunity. Best of luck for the rest of your meeting.
Thank you, sir. So to level set where we're at, the board has gotten information and feedback by a variety of different sources. This summarized 3 of our engagement sessions. The board also held 3 engagement sessions over the course of, I believe, beginning in January. November. So from November through April, engaged in 3 additional sessions around school culture, facilities and academic achievement and success. So lots of different opportunities for feedback. Also received information via survey that, again, we reviewed May 9th and is available for the community to review as well. The 2075 task force provided a variety over the last 10 months of recommendations and guidance. And then we received the administrative recommendations that provided a really comprehensive look, including a long-range facilities plan, and touched on each of the 5 areas of focus of the 2075 task force. So lots of information has been available, reviewed, and digested by us as board members. I will then turn us to a conversation on operating expense resolution. This is a vote, an action item. May I have a initial motion? Ms. Hammer-Rolland, do you by chance have it up?
I do.
Okay, Dr. White.
It is recommended that the school board approve the initial resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limits for non-recurring purposes, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
So I want to open, Dr. Means, for you and your team to walk us through the recommendation and where we're at, and then opportunities for board discussion and questions and conversation. And ultimately, there may be an opportunity for motions here. There may be an opportunity to move forward or not move forward. This is the first of 2 conversations we'll have around. Dr. Means.
Thank you. We have legal counsel from Bulow Better, Mr. Jim Carroll is here. So if you have any questions on the resolutions that are in front of you, you can pause and ask Mr. Carroll any questions. The recommendation of our administrative team is that we seek operating referendum of a total of $48.4 million over the next 4 years. We are anticipating that we will have a shortfall of $52.4 million over the next 4 years. This is assuming a few factors. Factor number 1 is that the dollar amount that we will utilize for fund balance will not be recouped through the fund balance or through a referendum, excuse me. It was our initial thought that we could replenish our fund balance through a referendum to make sure that we keep a healthy fund balance. We are understanding that there may be a tolerance level where the community may not want to assume that level of responsibility. That's number 1. Number 2, I'll go back to, we are anticipating over the next 4 years, a shortfall of $52.4 million. We're recommending a request of 48.4. That's assuming that the administration will make $1 million in cuts over the next 4 years. Those will be very difficult cuts. You've heard from the community, and I agree that when we are fully resourced at the school level, our kids and our staff can do amazing things. So this would mean that we would and it will be counterintuitive. So we'll be asking for a referendum and receive referendum dollars and still make cuts. And so explaining that to the community will be difficult. Couple other items, and then I'll pause and see if you have any questions. We did insert a 4% increase over the 4 years within this dollar amount that we're projecting to be our shortfall. And so there will be a question of, are we continuing to pay teachers with the shortfall? Yes, we are, but the 4% will never get us out of the bottom quartile. We'll never become the destination district that we all want to become by continuing to simply invest to 4% over the next 4 years. There's been a lot of questions in the community of what if the legislative maps change and legislative decisions are different in Madison, and there's more funding provided to schools over either the 2025, 2027, or the 2027, 2029 state biennial budgets. The board always has the ability to under levy. So if you do find yourself in a situation where we are getting more support from the state level, that doesn't mean that you have to maximize your taxation authority. You can under levy if we find a reversal in trend with state funding. Those are some of the main components of just general questions I've received from board members or the community as it pertains to the operating referendum.
I would open it up for board questions and conversation. Dr. Worley.
So could you explain a bit more to this 4% that's included? Is that a change from last week? Because we also talked about option C and some of the pieces, and there you had 8 million for increasing educator compensation. So can you talk a little bit more about where is that 4%? What else are we cutting that you had imagined? I know you don't have all the details, but how is that 4% being maintained? And then I guess how that's different from the idea of having funding to increase, and what the difference is in terms of like maintaining staff and all of that.
It's a good question. So let me go back and state that we are anticipating, again, a shortfall of $52.4 million. And so in our anticipation of building budgets, Mr. Brightman and I asked Mr. Brightman to build in the 4% increases so we at least can stay somewhat afloat and keep up with salaries across the metropolitan area. But what we would tell you from a financial standpoint and from a market share standpoint, that 4% increase is not enough to remain competitive with surrounding school districts. There are surrounding school districts who routinely go to referendum to make sure that they are compensating their teachers, and they have made themselves destination districts. That's why under option C, we do suggest an additional $8 million to go above that base 4% to continue to pay teachers. You may be wondering, so where did that number come from? We know that 1%, a 1% increase for all of our educators is the equivalent of $440,000. So over the course of 4 years, if we provided an additional 4%, that would be, now that puts us in a category of being very competitive and retaining teachers. Typically, teachers leave districts in a post-Act 10 environment in Wisconsin because they know their worth and their value, and they understand that they are able to, they can go and shop their talents in other districts. So having that extra dollar amount in order to make our salary system more competitive with other school districts is the goal. The last thing I would just say to your question, Dr. Worley, is you've received emails and heard in this boardroom, a lot of our veteran staff are still struggling with our current funding, our current salary structure, because we did not have enough money to start it in a way where we were honoring the years of service that they invested. We created a more equitable salary system, but it was not the ideal. And so this extra dollars that we could have under option C, or the $8 million, would clearly allow us to be more competitive, but also I would say right size our salary system that we currently have in place. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So just a quick follow-up. If it was to be 4 million instead, where would that place? I mean, just theoretically, how close does that get us to
being more
Meeting some of our
competitive.
goals of being more competitive.
We think having an increase of 8% over the next 4 years will get us out of the hole, the financial hole that we're in. We believe that will be the fix. And as you heard earlier this evening, there will be other communities who are going to be faced with these types of conversations. And candidly, I think some communities will blink and not pass referendums. I think there will be some school systems that will make drastic changes and cuts to their operations. And our administrative recommendation is that we want to position Wauwatosa in a place to emerge out of this, I believe, this 4-year space where the legislature will change. And I think public sentiment around public school funding will shift, but the next 4 years, for those who are optimistic that the legislative maps are going to change immediately, I just don't see it. I think it's going to take the 4-year mark to get us to that place, and that's the basis for the recommendation.
Okay, the 48.4 would get us to that
I
place.
think the 42. Well, thank you for getting me back on focus here. I think the 48.4 million is our recommendation because we're heeding the council and the sentiment that was expressed in the community survey. And the community survey, in essence, expressed the community wants to see the district tighten its belt and to make tough decisions. And again, it's going to be counterintuitive to go to referendum, receive $48.4 million, and still make $1 million in cuts. And it's going to be painful professionally because we know that what we've currently put in place works. And so it's going to be counterintuitive on all fronts, but we're trying to meet people in the middle with our recommendation of being conscious of the feedback that's been received through the surveys. And that survey basically from the school perceptions, in essence, said that the community wants to see us make cuts. Let me state for the record, there has been a lot of attention given to the growth of our system-wide support that we provide to curriculum, to district administrators. There's been a lot of attention to that space. And unfortunately, we would have to make reductions in that space. And when I arrived here nearly 3-4 years ago now, there wasn't any support in place. I understood why we had a 13-year-old curriculum in science or why we had data policies and procedures. We didn't have anyone who was attending to those things. If we make the reductions at the district office, those services it may feel like you're reducing the district office that is not student facing, but the number of calls that our teachers and our principals make to the people in the Fisher building, we can't ignore those calls. And those calls will be slowed down. It will create, I believe, a feeling of isolation for teachers and principals and schools because we won't be able to respond as quickly as we are right now to support teachers and students and obviously the community. I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's a mountain, and this is not hyperbole. I believe there's a mountain of data that we've made available prior to even this vote this evening. That work was created by the people who are here. If we didn't have those individuals here, the data that's been, I think in the past, the data may have been requested. There was no one here to actually collect it. And so now, once we have the data in place and they're good professionals, I think it's positioned the community to have a more robust, transparent conversation and it's positioned the board to make good governance decisions as well.
I know there's other people need a chance too, but I just wanted to ask because there were several other pieces of what could be cut. And one of the conversations we've had is about our distinctive goal to reduce class sizes. Under the proposal that you've made, what do you anticipate would need to happen to class sizes in order to, for the next several years, follow our commitment to not go into fund balance to cover any problems that we have. So this 48.4, what is the likely impact on class sizes? I ask because not only do I, but I think many parents pay a lot of attention to that particular question.
They will increase. The class size, we enjoy very low class sizes in the Wauwatosa school system. Those class sizes will increase. That's one of many places we will make the reductions to make those cuts in the $4 million. I would just encourage the community to take a look at a document. The title of it is the Long Range Budget Planning Recommendation from our administrative team, starting on page 2, and it goes all the way through page 6. It identifies where the reductions would be made. And we clearly outline that we would have to make reductions in deans of students. 3 years ago when I arrived, people said that they were bothered and concerned by the behavioral challenges in our secondary schools. Well, the deans of students have helped us in that space. And I could go on in terms of the curricular instructional support. We didn't have curricular specialists who were attending to our curriculum. We are one of the 20 largest school systems in the state of Wisconsin. It's actually, it's hard to believe. It was hard for me to believe when I entered that we didn't have a person who was responsible for ensuring that we were staying up to date with the science of English language arts. I think the board and the community saw the value of that firsthand while we're in the midst of the Act 20 controversy at the state level. We have one of the best English language arts coordinators in the state of Wisconsin. And we're positioned to handle those situations. If we didn't have her, then what would happen would be you would place all of that work on Dr. Marble. Then Dr. Marble becomes an ELA coordinator, not your chief academic officer. You met Dr. Sarah Blaylosh, who is our doctor. Let me say that again. Dr. Sarah Blaylosh, who's our curricular specialist for K-12 science. It's hard to really fathom the fact that a district that likes to say we provide strong STEM programming across the district didn't have someone who was attending to it from a district perspective. We didn't have anyone. I could go on, but page 2 through page 6 lays out all of the different places we would make cuts, all of the gains we've made from a behavioral standpoint and academic standpoint. And this is not hyperbole. This is not a threat. This is not to say if you don't support a referendum, this is what would happen. This is from 27 years of administrative experience. You have to staff your school system in a way to get the results you want. When I arrived, I wasn't surprised that we were getting the results that we were getting. We weren't staffed in a way to do it. And that's not a criticism of the past. That's not to say that's just not a criticism. In fact, in the mid 2010s, we did have curricular specialists. We did have, not prior to Kristen Bowers, there was a woman by the name of Beth Ehrenberger who had people who attended to our curricular needs. And that infrastructure just all went away. When I worked here 20 years ago, we had one of the most robust curricular programs in the metro area. We were the envy of many school systems. And so to have left in 2005 and arrive back in 2021 and see that there was nothing here, I was excited about the fact that we could turn things around quickly, because I knew that if we just made the investment in our teachers and in our curriculum, that we would see results from our strong students.
Thank you for all that. And I just want to say to my board colleagues that I feel responsible to find a better number than we've been offered. I don't think it's quite enough yet. I don't think we want to be extravagant. I think we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community that they want a good school district. They don't need, they don't need a cruise ship type school district, right? But that they want some of the things to continue that this proposal, because I know you've had a lot of pressure to come up with cuts that this proposal is going to take away. I don't know what the right number is. And I encourage us to dialogue about that a little bit more tonight and try to figure it out. But personally, I know I'll get pushback from this, but I don't feel like the number offered is going to be what we need for the next 4 years, given the situation where we're at with the level of state funding that's anticipated, at least in the near future. Thank you.
I just have a couple clarifying questions. Under the recommendations for the 4% increases, is that for teachers or staff?
We could say educators because we have to be careful. We have social workers and school psychs. And so those are also student facing positions. So we use the term educators. Those are people who are in our schools working with children.
So that would or would not include like the school psychologists?
It would.
Okay. Would that include district administrators?
Yes, I think that Mr. Brightman, does that also include district administrators?
No, we base that just on student-facing positions in the district.
And that would be the same with that $8 million recommendation for options to C?
I'm sorry, so the 4% is across the board for all employees.
Okay.
8 million, which would provide an additional about 4% is just student-facing.
Thank you.
Yes. Good question. So just for clarity, as for people following along, the 4% that we have inserted in is for all employees and all educators. The additional $8 million would go directly to forward-facing student in the school building employees. It wouldn't be to create even more salary for administrators, district administrators specifically.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer.
My comments are pretty much the same for all of the votes tonight. First, I think I should explain some things. There is the state equalization of aid because constitutionally every child in Wisconsin is entitled to the same education. So wealthy communities are put in there's three categories. I'm sure Mr. Brightman can speak more up to date, more knowledgeable, with better information than me. So this, in general concepts, I'll speak to it this way. Wauwatosa is in the upper third of wealth as far as communities in the state. And so we are in the bracket called negative tertiary, where if we spend $1 beyond a certain limit, there's a reduction in state aid that, and I don't know what the reduction is this year, but it's on the order of 60, 70. How much?
67.
67%. So in order to have $1 to spend, you have to tax $1.67. And over the years, that is why we did not go to referendum. Because like I said, $1.67 in tax to get $1 to spend. What we did was leverage open enrollment. And as we know from Dr. Means' recommendations, the open enrollment made economic sense 20 years ago. It does not make economic sense anymore. Someone referenced the idea of, I think it was the 08 to 09 year. I forgot exactly what year it was. The legislature passed the budget late in the spring, and suddenly we had a lot less money than we thought we would. And we met the financial gap by accepting 270 open enrollment students off of our wait list in 1 year. So those are the things we did over the years to avoid a referendum, in part because the referendum, like I said, it was pricey to get the taxpayers $1.67. And the number might have been different other years, but it's similarly high to get $1 to spend. When we went to referendum in 2018, the business office then came up with a plan, well, some would call it a scheme. DPI wasn't very happy, that the bond payments are every other year. So if you look year in, year out at our spending, it goes up and down by about $10 million every year, up and down, then up and down. That's why. And because of the negative tertiary penalty, I'll call it, has a hold harmless, where it has to hit you more than 1 year in a row before they really take your money away. That kind of beat the formula. So my question here now is that we're looking to tax total $27 million a year. And will we get net $27 million to spend? So I think the board needs to know that. On the idea, what the answer to that is, I think on the idea of the deficit and the reserves and the fund balance, we always wanted to avoid short-term borrowing. And I'll try to explain it this way. And again, Mr. Brightman can do it far better than me because he's the smart one on this and I'm not. So let's say we have a $12 million a year deficit. Well, and we don't have a fund balance, we run out of money at the end of month 11. So we borrow the million to get us to the end of the spending year until the tax revenue comes in. And that's called short-term borrowing. So if you run $1 million deficit every year, the first year you run out of money at the end of month 11. The second year you run out of money at the end of month 10. The third year at the end of month, you see what I'm saying? I think there's maybe a 1 year limit on, short term has a definition. So you can only do that you can do that actually quite a while, but you do pay interest on that money. So we always wanted to try to avoid that. So that's the context of the history. Now, as for me here, I personally want the spending amount that the community wants. I kind of don't care. I mean, I care, but I'm a member of the community and I'll do what the community wants and I'll still be happy to live here, high or low. Higher will hurt, but I'll deal. But with regard to, so I want to get a referendum and give it its best chance to pass, meaning we have trust and the community trusts us. Griffin Bell, Jimmy Carter's first attorney general, said trust is the coin of the realm. He's probably not the only one to say that, but he's the one I remember. So we want to portray validly an image that we're trustworthy and there's no surprises. And that way, I believe we get more votes for this. We also, to get more votes, we need to communicate. We have some things in play now where we just don't know the answer yet. I haven't heard yet, maybe it's been communicated and I missed it, the negative tertiary impact. We are internally now having a professional discussion about how we account for things. And, all professions, there's not one way to do it. There's one way and another way. And we have a legitimate professional disagreement now over how we do our accounting. It's not a scandal. It's and it's coming about because we're changing business managers, and different business managers might interpret things differently. Where you code stuff, what ledgers to put things in. That is going to be reviewed in July and August, and we don't know what it's going to say. And it's not. I doubt that it will be a. It's not a scam. But it could change the numbers. And then everybody goes, oh no, what happened? They changed the numbers. We're like Milwaukee, some other large school district next to us. And it's like, and it won't be because we did anything like fishy. It's just, we didn't know yet. So I don't know negative tertiary. I don't know the impact of what we're going to learn about, somebody's going to come in and basically referee the disagreement. And then we're going to pick away, and that's going to set the numbers. I have a concern about the language. I had to, in the referendum wording, I had to look at it a lot. And I showed it to some lay people, and the consistent response was, well, they're not talking straight there. The question is, on the operational referendum, it says it's non-recurring. And then it says what it's going to be spent on. Well, it's non-recurring revenue for recurring costs. And anything we can do to word that a little bit more plain language so that, and there will be those people who, day before the vote in November, they're going to pull out the referendum language and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, I want them to be able to say they understand it on first read. So let me see, there's that. And my last concern is that I wanted to vote for Dr. Means' plan tonight. I mean, the plan. There's things I disagree with in it. I'd want to talk about STEM and the Spanish language program, but we're looking here tonight to approve taxation, and conceptually we have a pretty good idea where the spending will go. But like was said in public comment, that comment said they would like more precision in what we say. So I really, really wish we could call the roll on the plan before we call the roll on the referendum. And so there's my input.
Mr. Brightman, are you able to speak a little bit to the negative tertiary aid and how paying every other year has minimized the impact for our district?
Yeah, so the way the formula works is I never like the term penalty because it's a statewide formula that equalizes, called equalization aid formula. So it equalizes the tax impact across the state. So there are districts like Wauwatosa that have high property value per student. And there's so many benefits for that, a thriving, healthy community. And yes, there's a negative tertiary impact to that. All the numbers you're seeing in front of you include any negative tertiary impact, correct? Already.
So you netted it out.
Correct. Yep. So on the capital side, which we're not talking about that yet, we're doing or duplicating that every other year debt payment. So we can issue infinitely more debt in those every other years and not impact state aid at all.
If my interrupt, so the money we're asking to tax will cover the cost of the program.
Yes.
That Dr. Means is proposing, more or less. We haven't voted on the program. That was my other question. So it's going to net out so that, well, that's all figured out.
Right, correct.
Okay.
It's all in the numbers that you're seeing as far as the tax impact.
Okay.
And then on the operating side, we're already spending the dollars. So the aid impact is already there. So we're just levying dollars to support that continued level of spending. So that's why it's a little bit different for each one of the resolutions we're looking at tonight. So the capital, replicating, duplicating the every other year payment. You can issue as much as you want, no impact on state aid. The operating side, we're already spending it. The state aid impact is already baked into the financial projections. And so the revenue side would offset the financial gap that we're seeing.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Brennan? So my understanding of what the administration has packaged as a request is not money that would go to anything new. It is money to continue to do with the $1 million cut baked in what the administration is currently doing. So there's not a new ask here. It is a continuation. So
it's a reduction, $1 million.
Actually, a reduction.
Yes.
It's a reduction. If the referendum doesn't pass, so there will be board members this evening who will say, I want to preserve certain programs that you've been lobbied on by certain constituency groups. If you want to meet their needs, then you, to Dr. Worley's point, you need to exceed what we're recommending. Our $48.4 million is bare minimum. So as you continue to have your conversations, you should and you can if you want to, it's not even an issue of wanting to support my program or the program that we've brought forth as a district. You've heard from certain people, they want to maintain Spanish. They want to expand STEM. If you want to do those things, our $48.4 million is bare minimum. It is just keeping status quo. It is not doing anything new or extensive. That's all it is. And so, yes, we can talk about the negative tertiary impact. The impact would even be worse if we have to actually implement the level of reductions that the state is imposing on us because it's refused to fund schools at an adequate level, which the Constitution states is supposed to do.
I have gotten questions from the community about, can we sue the state? No,
I bet we could, but right, good luck.
not where I'm going to focus my time.
Right.
That's where there are many folks in the state of Wisconsin considering legal ramifications. I'm going to go to Dr. Voig and then.
Oh, may I say, they give us our charter to exist. So, you know, the idea you can't fight City Hall, well, you can't fight your creator either, kind of, sort of.
Dr. Voig.
And to be clear, I just want to finish that part of the conversation to clarify that point is that we are not, those conversations around the administrative recommendations, those are ongoing conversations we're going to have for months and months ahead. So this is not, while we're looking at it as a whole, because we're trying to understand sort of this as a gestalt, we're like this, what we're talking about today, a referendum is to maintain, not even maintain, because what you're asking for, I think, is a reduction, in what we're doing. We're not maintaining the status quo, we're reducing what we've done. So that's what I want to talk about is that 4 million, because I do understand how you came to this, that you're looking at the community survey and you're saying, as a whole, the estimate is that what we were asking for in that survey is we don't predict, or the group we use didn't predict that it would pass at that level. But I'm also looking at the like sort of what are the cost cutting options that were in that community survey and what the community wants to cut. It's nothing. The community doesn't perhaps as a whole want to fund this referendum. Understandable, people don't like their taxes to go up. But also they don't want us to change what we're offering to our students.
Not at all.
So the one thing that was listed as sort of like elevated as what could we cut or what should we cut as a district is administrative. You talked about the administration and how there are different ways of looking at that, how that's been done differently over the decades of this district. I also would argue we probably don't have $1 million a year in administrative costs that we could cut without completely decimating everything that's done in this building, which would then change our technology upgrades, our curriculum updates, our academic support services, and on through this survey. So what does that look like? What can the community expect? Because if we're saying, because I think like Dr. Worley, I would say, if we need $52.4 million, then we need $52.4 million, and we should be asking for $52.4 million.
Can I add to your argument? If we don't cut the million and the fund balance is gone, we will start to short-term borrow. There won't be any other choice, right? So that's going into the financial abyss. And so I'm working with your point here. And then that's like a downward, you go from gun to your head to death spiral, you know.
Mr. Brightman, how many school districts would you estimate actually short-term borrow?
Over half. I don't know the actual number.
So just for the public that's following, what we're saying is that in Wauwatosa, we don't have to short-term borrow between the time period where we're running our payroll and when the tax rolls receive its new money. In most school districts in the metro area, you have to short-term borrow and get a loan, if you will, to hold you over until the tax income comes in January 1st. We don't do that in Wauwatosa. Now, that's good. That's excellent. That congratulations to us. But what you're going to have to come to grips with is, and I think this conversation is exactly, it's been what's exhausting for me, because I hear in one breath from the community, we want to be we want to achieve, we want the academic results that we received 20 years ago. We want to be the Wauwatosa of years past. Well, I was here 20 years ago. We were staffed way differently than we are right now. We had Mr. Meyer, you're the historian. We had a program called the Early Literacy Intervention Program, or ELIP. And that program actually identified very, very small levels of children who were struggling with literacy. And we had a certified reading specialist working with just those students. We've gone from funding something called ELIP to not even having enough academic specialists to work with the 25 percentile of students who are struggling. So the community has to come to grips. And I think, there was the community has to come to grips with what it wants to fund, and then reconcile that and balance your expectations for your public schools based on how much you want to invest. And what we are dealing with is 20 years of a stranglehold that was quiet and silent. And so I've said this before. I wasn't surprised when the board said, well, why are teachers leaving? They were leaving because you weren't paying them, or you weren't giving them updated curriculum, or you weren't supporting them when they were having behavioral challenges with students and they needed someone to work with them. Or there were children who were dealing with social emotional struggles and there wasn't anyone in the building that could help them. When you have those working environments in play, that's the reason why staff don't leave. That's the reason why. And candidly, that's why then when you find a very special, well-functioning special program in the district, you want to hold on to those programs because they work. And if you see that the school system isn't funding its general universal programming, why would you trust that the universal program is going to be funded? Because we continue to have these conversations.
So even farther back in 1993, when the levy limit started, the talk around town, 89, 88, 89, was that it was really hard to become a first-year teacher in Wauwatosa schools without already having a master's degree. We were that well-funded, and it showed.
It showed.
So
yeah.
If we want to be that, we have to be able to write the check. And that's how we write the check. We tax or we borrow. Two choices. Or we used to use open enrollment. Open enrollment isn't working financially. So there you are. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to.
Thank you for affirming the statement I made. All I would say is I left a district in the metro area that is known for hiring highly educated, highly credentialed educators. And when I arrived here in human resources, that was the same mentality we had. There's no way we can compete with one of the union high school districts in the metropolitan area that's on the North Shore. There's no way we could compete with them financially now. When I arrived here in 2002, we could compete with that union high school district in terms of getting highly credentialed staff members coming to work in Wauwatosa. And that's because the structure has been changed. So, Mr. Meyer, thank you for affirming the comments I've just made.
Dr. Means, can you explain what a union district is?
That's a high school. It's a high school district. So it's just a district that is 9 through 12.
Yep. Okay.
And there's only one in the immediate metropolitan area. There's one in Washington County. There's one in Waukesha County.
I'm sorry, did you answer my question? I think we got a little sidetracked.
Actually, Mr. Meyer answered your question. I think he answered your question by saying that, again, just for the record, the $48.4 million will result in a cut.
Mm-hmm.
That if we don't have that, it's not even maintaining status quo. And any success and progress we've made over the last few years will surely go by the wayside, because I think what you were trying to point out is that there's no way, and I've tried to express this in many ways, there's no way we can cut $4 million from the district office.
Right.
There isn't $4 million to cut from the district office. We will have to make reductions in other areas as well. So that $4 million is going to feel very counterintuitive to the community financially, because people are going to say, my taxes are going up. I've invested. Why are you making cuts?
Mhm.
It just doesn't. And again, over the last few years, I continue to hear this message of, we want to be the Wauwatosa of years past, where we had really strong scores. You can't be the Wauwatosa of years past if teachers are unable to teach because there's behavioral issues. You can't be the Wauwatosa of past if you have higher class sizes, or you don't have the caliber of teachers that you want because you're not compensating them. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I recognize, as specific as we could get, I think it would be beneficial, because I do want people to understand that the $1 million decrease per year is absolutely going to affect students.
Yes. And so I want to also answer not your question, but a statement from Mr. Meyer, which is actually the language in the referendum resolution is identical to what we're actually doing. We're asking for a non-recurring referendum for recurring expenses. So we are telling you up front, we realize that we're asking for a dollar amount, that we're not asking into perpetuity. We're saying we need it for 4 years. We need it for 4 years for things that we know are recurring costs. But the language is actually very clear. It's stating, if you don't give us the non-recurring dollars, that those recurring costs will actually even become more scarce in terms of the resources being available.
Well,
It's extremely clear.
I'll still press the lawyers to wordsmith that so that the person on the street knows. Because I figured it out. You knew from the beginning. I want to get as many votes as we can for this referendum. But that's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just trying to
I think
throw in
part
for
of
the
what
team here.
I think part of this conversation is key. So I appreciate it being lifted up. The 48 point, let's just be very clear. The 48 point, we need 52.4 million. We need 52.4 million. Our recommendation is 48.4 because we're trying to be fiscally prudent. I wouldn't even, that's not prudent, conservative. We're trying to be fiscally conservative in giving you a recommendation. But we realize that, and we're trying to appeal to people who may be in the middle based on this survey that says they're unwilling to support any referendum. But the difficulty that I have found in this role in this school community is that we have to be definitive of what the community wants for its public schools. Do you want the aspirational goal that everyone says they want every school to be this amazing place? I want that. Well, if you want it, then we need at least $52.4 million. I hope that was clear.
That was, thank you.
Morse? I don't have a whole lot to add because Dr. Hoeg and Mr. Meyer and Dr. Worley have added a bunch of that. A lot of great context. One thing that I did get that I was hearing over and over, and I'm going to put out an analogy out there that some of the community members have given to me. It was what we've put forward and what we're asking for with reductions takes us from where our community believes we are in layman's terms. We're Target. We're a Target school district. We're not asking to be Nordstrom or Saks Fifth Avenue, Target. We want the feel of being an Aldi because we want the specialty nature and the specialty programs, but we're not asking for all of that. But when we take away and only ask for the lower number in order to satisfy the middle and other people, and it's not a knock on any stores, but we go down to the Walmart level, that the entire community is not there because there are different services you have at Walmart. There are different things that serve a different category of community. And so I'm not for paying more taxes, but if it's necessary, it's what I have to do in order to stay in this community and to build and have that ability to keep, and I've heard it over and over again from Dr. Means and from a lot of the administrators and a lot of the teachers, we want to be this lighthouse district. That costs something. And there's an investment that has to be made. I'm going to be invested for quite some time. I've got 2 in the district, 1, a third hopefully coming in Possibly in the next school year, we'll find out. It's going to cost more. Property taxes are going to go up. We make our own decisions on where we're going to live. And I chose to move, when I moved 6 years ago, 0.6 miles straight up the same road. Hell, change only one thing, the school district. My backup option doesn't exist anymore. When Toasted Catholic, I'm not Catholic at all, but that was the backup if we didn't buy our house. And that came at a cost because that's not free either. So what I'm saying is for me and for the people in my community and the people across the city, when they look at these things, they look at the investments they're going to make now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, all the way through to when their student is going to get to that finish line and hopefully get to that finish line with a lighthouse level education to compete with their peers that they're going to see on the baseball field, the basketball court, the soccer field, and our neighboring districts. So we feel like, to Mr. Meyer's point, every child in the state should have the ability to have an equal education, a high level public school education. The only way we can do that is to make the tough decisions to invest in where we need those things. And if it's 52, if it's 60, if it's 49, whatever that number is, ask for, and I think Mr. Meyer said it perfectly, ask for what you need so we can get there and not take away from the things that we are expecting to be our status quo. So I think everything that we have and what we're seeing in one of the parents that were here from one of the communities that spoke earlier today, we don't want to see that momentum that we have fade in any way. We don't want to see the class sizes get larger for the sake of saving a couple of dollars. We don't want to see the things that we love and we see on our playgrounds and in the classroom and in our different clubs and extracurricular things come away that our children may not have for the next 4 years, the next 8 or 10 years. So I say, when we look at these things, make the decision. And the referendum, you know, I think we talked in the past meetings, you know, I'm not here to vote against it because I want to hear what the community has to say when they say, this is what we're going to do. And if the community comes out to Mr. Meyer's point in the past and saying they vote against it, and so be it. Then that changes where we are and what the values truly are. But if it comes out and says, we asked for this, we are willing to invest in it, we're going to have these things, we're going to move in this direction, we're all going together. It takes everybody to get there at the same time and the same pain sometimes to see the greater good of what we're doing.
Summerall.
I guess I would just push back a little bit on what I've heard the board and Dr. Mean say regarding making cuts. I mean, I think any institution or company, there's always efficiencies that can be made. So it sounds a little, to me, my perspective is, of course, if we're asking for more money from our taxpayers, I think part of being good stewards of the fund is going through and looking at potential cuts. So I just want to say, the conversation I just heard kind of sounded like we don't want to make any cuts. I don't think that is the case. I think we're committed to being an efficient school district.
Sure.
So I just wanted to point that out. I also want to say, because I see this a lot and hear this a lot, and Mr. Brightman, correct me if I'm wrong, Wauwatosa is really unique in the way that we utilize paying the debt every other year. So the negative tertiary aid affects us differently than it would most. I think Baird, or when we got the report, it was maybe 13 other school districts in the state that pay this way. So I just want, for community members, we don't exactly follow what you might read about negative tertiary aid, just because we're unique.
We've minimized it. We've minimized the impact as much as we can. Yes.
I just think that's an important point, because we are an outlier.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So you can't lose more than 15% of your state aid in any one year to the next. And so by having every other year debt payment and adding that cost, but not having it that even year, resets that bar. So without that, you'd lose 15% for many years in a row. By resetting that bar, you lose 50%, it goes back to whole, you lose 50%, go back to whole. So it's a very creative way to work within the formula and be legitimate with it, but yet optimize how we fit within that.
And Mr. Brevin, as a follow-up, Dr. Means, if one or both of these referendums pass, would that change how we're utilizing and paying for the aid and paying for the?
No, he's just said that.
Yeah. I think when we talked about it in finance, we discussed that.
So the operating side, we're already spending the dollars, which impacts aid. So that's already baked in. And with the numbers you're seeing for the tax impact, that's inclusive of everything.
So
the capital side would continue that every other year payment. So you could issue as much debt as you want. Not suggesting that, but I'm just saying there would be no impact on spending.
That's helpful.
Can I just, to Liz's first comment, because it went to something I was thinking about too. And Having been on finance, we're probably more aware of those savings. I don't know if we want just a couple of examples of efficiencies this year, and do you anticipate that if you didn't do if we didn't have you or do a referendum that led to 1 million, there's still a lot of ways in which you could come up with some efficiencies in the coming year. Am I correct?
There are, we can find ways to make reductions. We can do it.
I'm thinking about like the ways you've used data that you hadn't used before this year, the ways that you've looked for bids that you hadn't done in the past. I think people just need to be aware that this is not something that is being ignored.
No, we're $100 million. We have a $100 million budget. Can we find efficiencies? Yes. I think I just would be remiss if I didn't say that we finally have a program and a team in place and a structure and a system in place that's gaining traction. And so maybe that's what I'm trying to express. I'm not saying we can't make the reduction. Of course we can. But I guess what's just painful professionally to watch is that we spent all this effort and energy in building up something that we're now seeing that is gaining results for children and is making this a better place for people to want to work. And then we would have to start dismantling it a little bit. That's tough. But that's not to say that we won't be ready to do it if that's what we need to do.
So several items, and I spent much of the weekend talking to a few folks who've had some really great questions about referendum. I talked to a gentleman for about 90 minutes over the weekend who I said to him, my goal was, he was a staunch, no more taxes ever. I'd like some more back that I already am paying in. I said, my goal is for him by the end of the conversation to both get every question answered and for him to be able to struggle going into that voting booth because he felt so good about the information he had. And if he wanted to fund schools at all, he'd be willing to do this despite his misgivings about any raised taxes. And we had a great conversation. And I want to thank him for taking that time. So we have been, since my time on the board started in late 2017, advocating to the legislature over and over again to change the amount of funding that all school districts would get. We are one of 25% of districts in all of Wisconsin, 25% of districts that have not previously asked for an operating referendum. So we're one of the last to ask in the state of Wisconsin. I'm going to argue that Elmbrook, who we often aspire to be in terms of our test scores, has had a de facto referendum in place since 1993, where they get over $1,300 for every student in their district than we get for our students. $1,300. So did some napkin math, and that comes up to about, since 1993, $242+ million. So they've got a $242 million head start because, as we had a speaker earlier articulate, that's what we decided to do in 1993. So we locked ourselves in and we have funded our schools $242 million less than Elmbrook over that period of time. I'm glad to hear kind of the information about all the stuff that I've read and that the community's now heard about negative tertiary impact. I am thinking about, I'm glad that we have the long range facilities plan, and I know we'll talk about capital next. I asked Dr. Means, I think on Friday, the two things that I'm not comfortable with not including some additional resources for beyond the ask is one, improving teacher compensation. That was really clearly a value articulated in what the community was articulating is where they wanted to invest. Everything I have read and understand about education is that the quality of teachers and the amount of time kids have in front of those teachers is what leads to outcomes. Everything else drives it, but those two things are essential. So the better teachers we have, those cost money. Then I want to give some tools for that. The other one is we do not have enough money, by my estimation, for curriculum updates to continue on with our 7-year curriculum cycle updates. So in the next 4 years, we've got a K-12 social studies curriculum that would need to be implemented and a JK through 12 math curriculum that would need to be implemented. Last week, we heard that we had $6,000 set aside in the budget for curriculum updates. At 600,000. And that money is not enough. The other one that I continue to struggle with, and I hear repeatedly from the community, is desire to improve. And Dr. Means, you just spoke to that with it. What's the program that used to be in place? The
ELIP,
ELIP.
the Early Literacy Intervention Program.
So different than that, but right now we are providing interventions to 10%, our lowest 10% of performing students.
Should be 25.
And we want to target 25%. So those are three things that I've heard universally is we want to invest in teachers, in quality curriculum and materials, and we want to increase our student interventions. Not having that in the 48 or frankly in the 52, if we gave the whole amount, is for me problematic. I'm really struggling when I do a deep dive into the data of the community survey. And the struggle I have is, Ms. Hammerland, I agree. And I have observed the district looking for ways to find efficiencies, cutting programs that don't work, even when it's a hard conversation, making strategic hard decisions, even when the community and people who are affected don't like it. And we need to continue doing that. And the community clearly doesn't actually want to cut anything. They just want to pay less in taxes. And I suspect the entire board is on board with that. If we could not raise taxes and get as much or more, we would all vote affirmatively for them. We are not in that position. And so we started with Dr. Worley kind of articulating, wanting to have a conversation about what is that number? Mr. Meyer is right on. We need a referendum that passes because we think $4 million is problematic of not having it. If we have to cut this from our operating budget, I'll just kind of point out that will be absolutely catastrophic to our school district. The data doesn't have to, we don't have to try to scare you. It will just be a scary thing to go through. And any other, we heard from, I think it was in Lincoln, a teacher who was teaching out in a suburban district who just didn't pass a referendum. They said, no, when they say if they don't have the money, they're serious. They're going to close schools. Class sizes are going to be 30 or 40 students. There won't be curriculum. It will be deeply problematic. So I want this, we need this. Whatever we put out to the community to pass, we have to have really good clarity on what folks are going to get and why it's absolutely essential. And the Eisenhower PTA president has come forward each of the last 2 weeks in public comment and really clearly articulated, tonight with some humor involved, we have the opportunity to look at what the plan has been. We have the data to articulate that the plan is working. If we invest in doing exactly what we're doing now, find more strategic ways to do it, let a team of really good professionals continue to hone it, make sure that we're compensating teachers, provide them the curriculum and resources, we will continue to get better. And that's on top of right now, our high schools being in the top 3% and top 7% in the state of Wisconsin. So despite all the challenges, our educators, while they may have been doing it with duct tape, a little bit of silly putty, I know, no doubt that they're tired, but they've been doing good work. And so those are two hard things. People want excellence in our education system and don't want to pay for it. It is a miracle that our educators have pulled this off. And what we have seen in the last year and a half to 2 years is when we invest in it, we're already seeing the data and the trajectory. And this is all information that is available to the full community online. There's dashboards everywhere. There's data and information out there. And I would implore the community to do all their research. Just like the gentleman I talked to, that if you go in and do a deep dive, every question can be answered. All the data can articulate and tell the story of the impact that additional resources can have on our schools and our kids. And frankly, there is nothing that will drive community success more than exceptional schools. So I want to engage with my colleagues on what is that number? So we have right now, the anchor of which what we're talking about is a $48.4 million operating referendum. That gets us what we're doing now with $1 million of cuts.
So minus.
It gets us less than what we're currently doing. In the midst of a lot of folks advocating to us about all the other things they would like to see us do. And the things that I would toss out for your consideration of, one, do we want to do less than what we're doing right now? Or do we want to deliver to the community what they're saying? Keep doing what you're doing because we've got the data to back it up. Do we want to invest anything additional into educator? And these are classroom level student facing positions to continue to drive up our compensation. And or do we want to increase the number of student interventionists? And or do we want to make sure that we're funding curricular updates? Mr. Meyer.
First, the board should be aware that every board member on Treasurer Hummer Rollins' Finance Committee agrees with her about the need for a cut, something. I truly believe that, and also going forward know that there's a lot of perspective we have that we share. So when we bring recommendations to you, take it with that understanding. But Dr. Means told us repeatedly that the amount of resources that he devoted to Eisenhower, this is my word now, but it's interpreting him, staggering. It was a lot. And it worked. I think my own personal view, the Spanish program has not had the outcome we wanted because of resources. I think that a 60-minute-a-week STEM program at all of our schools is not enough for success of STEM. So here on and on and on and on, it comes down to resources. Now, I hope I'm aligning with our treasurer's perspective. Are we saying everything we did succeeded and we're just going to keep doing everything? Or is there something we tried and it didn't work out? We're going to stop doing that. And that's where we're going to get some of these savings from, right?
Yep.
Sure. But just for the record, what you said, actually, so I think another way of interpreting your statement is you're interested in talking about more than 48.4 million. Because if you believe that elementary Spanish should be funded in a way where it can truly flourish and that 60 minutes of STEM instruction, we would love to give more than 60 minutes of STEM instruction. That would mean more STEM teachers, which would increase costs. So
it would actually be more than 52.4 million.
That would be, yes, it would be more than 52.4.
52.4 million would get us consistency of staff salaries, reminding that 80% of our costs are that. So I think back to Eric's point is, we can keep going and we likely can find, to Mr. Meyer's point, a few things and continue to be good at, being careful about how we spend because that's been our way. But that's not going to get us to get us out of that sort of lower part of the median, on salaries over the next few years. But if we do the 52.4 million, we won't be putting Dr. Means and his staff into spending their time. This is another thing I thought about this week, trying to figure out how they're going to make all those cuts, because that's going to be time consuming as well.
Just a suggestion. So what if we committed to $500,000 in reductions per year? So that adds 2 million overall to the referendum cost. And then add the 8 million and 4 million for teacher compensation and curricular materials. My very rough math over here is that is about $62.7 million for 4 years.
Does that get us to the 25%?
No.
No, okay,
Oh, no.
okay. I'm just.
Can you ask the full question?
Yes, I'm thinking of, sorry, yeah, it's okay. You knew what I was talking about, but I'm thinking about that bottom 10% of academic achievement, that's the level of intervention that we're able to achieve right now. I know we've talked about it here at the board level many, many times. Certainly I have pushed for this because I think it's so, so important that we are reaching our lowest quartile and helping lift them up. Because those are not our students who are necessarily qualifying for tier, those sort of top tier services, those special education services, but they still need support and assistance outside of the classroom and within the classroom. And we can only do that if we have additional academic specialists, interventionists who can do that. And if I remember correctly, we're about 6 positions short at the elementary level. No? Am I working that? 12.
It's 12. And that's 12 at the elementary level, and that's not counting the secondary level.
Right.
Yes. So I think one thing you could do, so thank you for the question, and thank you for and I think let's not lose Ms. Heimer-Rowan's suggestion. That's the 12 million plus an additional 2. Because instead of reducing $4 million, we're going to reduce 2 million. So if you look at it from that perspective, that's taking the 48.4 and adding 14 million to it. Am I doing your math right?
Yes, but it's 48.7 million, not 48.2.
It's 48.4.
Oh, so it's different than this.
It's not what the slide said.
So this is where I'm going to turn to Mr. Brightman. I like to always, the disclaimer that I taught social studies. I did not teach econ, but if I'm doing the numbers right, it's 48.4 plus 14. That gets us to 62.4 million. Right.
And then that would be just shy of that'd be like 160 or 180-ish.
It's like in the middle.
Or 1,000.
C and D.
And I think to answer Dr. Hoyt's question, what you can blend the 2 models of what Ms. Heimer-Rowan shared with what Dr. Hoyt is sharing. If you want us then to identify or to even repurpose the $2 million in reductions to then go toward, I don't know, to go toward more academic specialists, we can do so. But just keep in mind that that's 12 staff members, and that's not including the secondary. So as a former high school principal and a high school teacher, and it may be hard to hear, we have children who come into high school at the 9th grade level reading at a grade level that's below 9th grade. And in my experience, those are typically the children who are the behavioral challenges. Those are the children who have just detached themselves from the school community because they know they're smart kids. They know that they're not positioned to do well academically. So they try to find other ways to find success. And that's to maybe make bad decisions. But within their social group, that's uplifted. So as we talk about the elementary children, we're ignoring the children at the high school level as well. I think speaking for Dr. Plank and Mr. Gala, they would clearly state that it is painful to see a cohort of children that Dr. Larson and Ms. Diana can identify at Whitman and Longfellow. And we know that those children aren't reading on grade level, and we know that they're going to struggle. We know it.
Just following with Dr. Hoyt there, we know that number, the new number that we just come up with there, just theoretically, doesn't get us to 25%. Our time period, so when we made the decision where we were working on that bottom 10%, we want to get to that 25%. What's the time period? Are we trying to get that from 10 to 25 immediately? Like this gets us there. We had a number. Is there a way that we can look at this in some form of compromise, or are we still making progress? We're stepping back from the 25 to get to 18 en route to 25. Does that number get us to 18 or 17?
This is a challenging meeting because I know the future of our kids are at risk. It's also a pretty exciting conversation to have. So what I would tell you, Mr. Morris, is that a really high functioning governance structure would be one in which the board would just, you would tell us that that's your goal. You would flat out say, our goal is to make sure that the bottom 25% of our children are receiving those services. And so we really don't care what you need to do to get there, but whatever cuts you need to make, we need you to get there. And so then you've prioritized. So then when you get emails about Spanish or about other programs, you're going to come back and say, as a governance team, we've prioritized this. So what I would tell you is that if that is your, and I think typically these types of conversations happen in a retreat, right? So if that is your priority, and I think it is based on what I've heard from you over the last year and a half, 2 years, that's your priority, then what Tim, the way that this would really work at a high level, you would say, Dr. Means, we need you. We don't care how you get there. Whatever reductions you need to make, that's our priority. We believe that that's going to allow us to get to our North Star the quickest. That's the most efficient pathway. And so that's our directive to you. Bring us a plan on how you're going to make the reductions in other places so we can hire those 12 staff members. Just like 20 years ago, some administrator and team came to this board and said, we want to fund the early literacy intervention program. And the board did 25 years ago. You have to, I think that would help us in this conversation. So that was a long answer to, I hope, your question.
Yeah, it got us there. I was just trying to think of the iterative nature of like progress, that North Star.
Yes.
Because if we get to that, say 2 years from now, we got to move our North Star.
Yes.
I said, so we're continuously moving. So in that process where we are right now, just going from 10 to 18, get us close to that 25 versus not getting there and saying, we still need to get to 25. So keep making more cuts, keep doing these things, keep finding more efficiencies versus continuing to push forward. If that's 8%, that's another 9%. If you get 8% for the next 3 years, you're surpassing your goal from where you started.
We firmly believe that we know who the children are at the elementary school level who are 2, 3 grade levels behind. If we have the chance to catch them up, that not only will you see an increase in your academic results on the state assessment, but you're going to see a decline in behavior. Because those two things are so tied together. And we don't talk about this enough. It's not, behavioral issues are not simply children either complying or not complying to a directive from an adult. It's how do you feel and how can you show up when you come into that building? And if you I think about your life experiences, if you've been in a meeting and you don't feel prepared for the meeting, you don't feel like yourself. You don't show up as your best self. If there is a 4th grade student who's coming in at maybe the 2nd grade reading level, that child can't show up as their self, their best selves. And I think that what we believe is that that's part of what we're facing in our district. So when we say lower class sizes, it's just not lower class sizes for the sake of feeling nice in a lower class size. That's nice. That's good. But I believe in lower class sizes because now at the elementary school level, if I have a class size of 15 and I have 4 children who I know are below grade level, we can invest more time in them. And then if the school system is investing in making sure that there's still a dean of students in an elementary school or more behavioral specialists or more paraprofessionals and educational assistants. Now I don't feel like the world is piling up on me as a teacher. Now I can see what's ahead of me and I can try to help get children out in a different way. So that's the strategy behind our low class size strategy with the elementary school level. So right now you're at 62.4 that's on the table.
With our focus on the curricular changes and with having more academic specialists working with our teachers to implement that, To me, that would seem like just over time as we keep implementing that our tier one will be a lot stronger. So hopefully we don't need as much capacity for two tier and three interventions. Just something else to think about if we're thinking in Philip's sort of gradual model, that hopefully gradually increasing from 10% and having a stronger general curriculum.
Yes.
That helps both ways for
Yes.
academics and behavior.
And just so to reinforce or maybe to statistically and anecdotally support your proposal of 62.4 million, the curricular adoptions for social studies will be more expensive because the way I taught 20, 30 years ago has gone away. We just don't bring out a textbook or you just don't bring out a journal anymore. The way that social studies is truly taught is in a way where you are using primary sources and you're allowing students to really get a hold of those primary sources. At the math level, we know that a K-12 math adoption is going to be expensive. That's just the way that things and the way that it goes. So typically an adoption for a district our size should be somewhere between $1 million if it's just elementary, or if it's K-12, it should be 2 million at minimum. And that's assuming that we're assuming 2024 numbers. You've often heard me quote a personal hero of mine of Dr. Martin Luther King. I want to quote my other personal hero, and that's John Dewey. John Dewey said this about instruction once. He said, give the students something to do, not something to learn. And doing is of such a nature as to demanding thinking or intentional noting of connections. Learning naturally results. So what John Dewey, a great educational philosopher 100 years ago, was saying was, if you give students something to do and not just to learn and memorize, they're going to feel more empowered as students, and then they're going to grow. I think as I've listened to feedback over our recommendations that's been shared over the last few weeks, I think what I'm hearing, because I'm working hard to listen to the concerns of what parents are sharing. And I think parents who are sharing that they want to maintain certain programs, they're saying, we have that in certain programs. We don't want to give that up and we don't want to have it watered down. And what I would say to them is we don't want to water it down either. We actually want to create a universal, as I've just elevated you to Dr. Ms. Hyman-Rowan. As Ms. Hyman-Rowan said, we want to provide that for all tier one. That's our goal. That is our ultimate goal. And we believe we can get there if we are resourced. Sorry for the long response.
So where we have landed right now is the current referendum, as suggested, is 12,100,000 per year for the next 4 years. We have been discussing what, if any, increase would we like to add into that recommendation. To summarize, we've talked about 4 different things. 1, a desire to maintain an expectation that the administration would make some cuts, shifting that from 1 million to 500,000. So we would be looking for both efficiencies, and I don't believe this is a new request, but a continuing request that we would need to then find things that are not working, we would divest from in terms of resources. We would be looking for the administration to make recommendations on that. Things that are having the least, and it could be like they are working, but they're having the least positive impact on student learning outcomes, strategic plan, and moving those things forward. So there would still continue to be an expectation of cuts. 2, we would be providing additional resources for our conversation, to what degree to be determined, for increasing student-facing positions, teachers, folks that have face time with students, that we would continue to fund increasing so that we are increasingly competitive with area districts who are competing for talent with. 3, we would fully fund the next 2 curriculum adoptions that are on that are substantial and major, and we don't have money in the budget built in for K-12 social studies and K-12 math. We've also had a conversation, and I'm not entirely clear myself at this point, about where the student interventionist. I don't think we've got any money to it. I think what I've heard from Dr. Weems is, tell us that you're expecting us to increase this, and we're going to figure out within the budget that we have
I think you have.
how to make it work.
Ms. Heimer-Rowan would say, how much more do you need us to say it? And so what I will take from this conversation, this is why this is a healthy conversation. What I will take from this conversation is that as we make our efficiencies, wherever we earn those efficiencies, they're reinvested into growing that team of interventionalists. That's what I'm taking away from the conversation tonight. So thank you.
So I'm looking at Dr. Means.
So Mr. Brightman has put together a very complicated but efficient and fast tax calculator. The tax rate implication on the $48.4 million referendum that we propose would be $1.36 on every $1,000 of value of your home. So on a $350,000 home, and I want to talk slowly so I get all of this right, the impact of what we initially proposed would be $475.
I'm just going to back up a little bit. So looking over to the left side of the worksheet on column C, the 48.4 has a tax impact of 125.
Thank you.
And $438 on the average.
I was looking at the 52.4.
Correct.
I'm sorry. So let me back up and thank you, Mr. Brightman. So the impact on our original recommendation was $1.25 on every $1,000 value of your home. So on a $350,000 home, it was $438. With the proposal that's on the table, that tax rate of $1.25 would go up to $1.62. $1.62.
This was the 62 point.
This is the 64.
This is 62.
62.4. Yes. So it goes down to $1.62 or $566 over on a $350,000 home.
Can you say that number again?
162 is the tax rate, and 566 is the impact on a home valued at $350,000.
Thank you. And to be clear, that's an annual increase to the property tax.
Yes.
For the operating component.
Right.
So that's an increase. So if you're wondering, that's an increase of $128 from our original proposal to the proposal of 62.4. Or to put it in perspective, it's an extra $10.66 monthly from what we originally proposed at the 48.4 million to the 62.4 million.
$10.66
Yes.
per month.
Is that per month?
And $350,000 is the average Tosa home.
That's the dollar that I'll let Mr. Brett.
Yeah, it was about 346 last time I checked, which was 2-3 months ago.
Just thinking out loud here. So I like the direction that we're moving in. So with Ms. Heimer-Rollins' suggestion was that we were at a place where we were cutting $500,000 per year from our operational costs compared to now. So we're at a place where we're starting like behind the starting line right now with what we've got. But we're also talking about increases in educator compensation, which I appreciate, increases in our ability to cover the next 2 curriculum that will come up during that period of time. I guess I would argue that we continue to always, of course, look for efficiencies, but that we just go right to the 64.4 million, start where we are, and anything extra that we make, instead of saying, well, we're starting $500,000 behind the starting line. So anything extra, all these efficiencies we might be able to get, we got to get 500,000 of those before we can even consider adding any more interventionalists. I would rather say, let's start where we are. Be efficient, be as efficient as you can, and maybe we get 1 or 2 or 3 more interventionists in a year because we can find some money somewhere. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, so I'll try to monetize it, and let me state this for the record. I know this board and all 7 board members care deeply about children and our staff. And so when we're having these conversations about staff and money, we're not trying to monetize people. I want to just state that. However, what you just stated and what Mr. Morris just stated is how do we build a plan to get to the 12 staff members that we know we need? In addition, what I would always say is that a staff member in that type of position is the equivalent of about $100,000. So at a minimum, you're asking us to cut at least $300,000 in some area of efficiency to then put it into the academic specialist. And we would have to do that. If we did that over the 4-year period, that's 12.
But if we start
3 times 4 is 12.
But if we start at minus 500, yeah. Good job.
Thank you so much.
But if we start at minus 500,000, because that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
You're already have to come up with the minus 500,000 and then an additional, an additional 300,000.
I think that's the challenge. I'm sorry for jumping in. I think that's the challenge that Mr. Meyer shared, which is he's struggling with having any conversation about additional taxation, but at the same time, everyone has aspirations of where we want to go as a school system. And we started behind, we're starting behind the line because at some point over the last 20 years, we've made reductions. I want to say it this way. I think we've made reductions that families without social capital did not realize. Families with social capital in the organization, they knew how to navigate the system based on the reductions we were making. And they knew which staff members they needed to access to ensure that their child was still having a good universal experience. But I can't say that with confidence across the entire district. And now that's the expectation. And if that's the expectation, Dr. Hoyk, I think you're right. Then we need more resources. I think that's what you're trying to express.
And the reality is if we went from what Ms. Heimer-Rollin was suggesting of 62.4 million to what I'm suggesting, which is 64.4 million, what we're talking about on that $350,000 home is about $18.
I think Mr. Brightman may actually even have the 64. I think you just calculated it, didn't you? Guys, $19.
19, okay. So for me, the opportunity to help, I don't know, I mean, how many ballpark, I know this is really off the cuff, but like ballpark, how many would 3 academic interventionalists, how many people might they touch in a given year?
Okay.
Typically, an academic specialist, their caseload is about 26 students per cycle, and then it just depends upon how many students they're able to get out of the intervention and bring in more. So there's no, it's a range.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
But at one time, 26.
But even if what we're saying then is, we're talking about 3 interventionalists, if we can, a year. That's 75 more students who are getting services that need it. To me, that's worth $19.
So yes, and so I hear you have a second proposal on the table of 64.4. So you started at 48.4. There's a model of 62.4 and a model of 64.4 on the table.
If we go back to our survey, and that asks about both the types of referendums that we're talking about. I just wanted to sort of keep that in our mindset that we have another one to talk about as well.
Yes.
So that the survey asked in a very general way, how much of the community would support $125 million in referendum, and it kind of packaged everything. And I think that it fell into, like, if I remember the number correctly, 42.3% of the survey takers said they could support the 125 million. You're interesting enough, if you take the next conversation we're going to have, which is the recommendation is 60 million plus 64.4 million, you're pretty close to, that's 124.4 million.
That's why back in the survey, taking a look at it. Yeah, it's very close to what,
If I can clarify, the survey was surveying, putting the capital side in a 5-year lens.
that, yes.
We're suggesting now a 20-year lens, which
Right.
spreads out those payments and reduces the tax impact.
Thank you for adding that. But yes,
Thank
I was
you.
trying to get kind of like a back on the table that we're talking about too. And we have some feedback in general about where we think that break point is for people. So wanting to go below that. Your point is really important. We'd have to really make clear what that difference is, because I think it's another. So I just wanted to put that out there as
Yeah,
where we
right.
have a data point.
You're right.
Um,
Mr. Meyer.
I think we as a board need to find out about this community, Wauwatosa. Who are we? If we don't ask, we won't ever know. I am kind of, not about you folks, but I'm kind of worn out about the Monday morning quarterbacking and, we should have done this, we should have done that. Okay, folks, let's make the ask we want to ask for.
Yeah.
And stop speculating about who Wauwatosa is. We need to find out. And, an old boss said the only certainty is that if you don't ask, the answer is no.
And we will adjust accordingly, Mr. Meyer.
I understand.
So on November 6th, if the community comes back and says no, then we know what we need to do.
Then it's put to rest.
Yes.
Who we are.
That's right.
Not bad or good. It's just what Wauwatosa wants to do. We need to find that out. And if Wauwatosa wants all these things, Wauwatosa will say yes. If Wauwatosa doesn't want all these things, then we as a board can stop struggling within ourselves about reaching for hypotheticals. That's not who the community is. And then the community and we will have to come to grips with whatever that is. We don't know what that is, but that's my look at it. Now, and with everything I've said, I've tried to promote, or whatever it is that our ask is in November, that our transparency, our mea culpas, we understand a philosophy. There has to be something that we need to take out because it just doesn't seem realistic. There's nothing that should be taken out. That we explain the negative tertiary. We explain how we used to use open enrollment and that doesn't work anymore. Put it all out there. That July and August we're having auditors come in and the audit standard always is generally accepted accounting principles consistently applied. Well, our new business manager applies things differently. And we have to explain that, and it will be different. But if we don't explain it, then we don't have anything to defend our change from prior practices. And government agency auditors could say we're being inconsistent. We have to have a reason to change our practices. So we're putting it all out there for everybody to see, right? And then that's how I get the most trust from people in the community, as I just tell it.
So I have one other item that I just think is important to have on the community record. The board will be determining what to do around open enrollment. And where this connects to this conversation is any future drawdown in open enrollment will mean drops in available resources that we will have to ask the district team to close that funding gap. So it's additional money where we will either need to make cuts or find other efficiencies. And so that's a future vote, the board to consider. I would suspect that we will make that decision sooner rather than later. But as it relates to this conversation, a drawdown in open enrollment isn't a net positive for our budget. Initially.
Until it's finished.
Until it's finished. It is going to, for the first several years, necessitate both a drawdown in resources and in a negative impact on our budget.
We have a sample chart on that.
If I may, there is no compromise, pick the middle on open enrollment. You either gotta go all in and maximize it or go minimize it. And to get from one place to another needs a bridging strategy that has a cost.
Yes. So I've heard the community pretty clearly on feelings and thoughts on that. And I think that that's something the board will need to tackle in advance, I suspect, of a referendum coming to pass. I'm going to suggest we have had a really robust conversation. I will benefit with the opportunity to sit for a few minutes to think about this before we have any final questions and take a board vote. Entertain any motions. Folks might want to check in with Dr. Means or Mr. Brightman on any specific clarifying questions any individual has, but I'd like to take about a 10-minute recess.
Sir, are you looking for a motion to amend?
I will, when we come back.
Okay.
I will be looking
So
for
just for the record,
a motion to amend.
there are three models on the table. There's what we recommended, which is the $48.4 million. There's a second model of $62.4 million, and there's a third model of $64.4 million. Those are the facts. As Mr. Brightman highlighted, our second conversation, agenda item 4, is around facilities. That is financed over a 20-year period. What you're discussing under agenda item number 3, A and B, is financed over a 4-year period. And what we discussed is that if you looked at, again, for the facts, if you looked at the $48.4 million tax rate is $1.25 on every $1,000 of the value of a home. That's the 48.4, $1.25. When you look at the $62.4 million impact, tax rate impact is $1.62. $1.62. And if you look at the impact of a $64.4 million tax rate is $1.67. The difference between the 62.4 and the 64.4 is $19. So it's a $19 difference.
I just have a clarifying question. How is Dr. Hoag's recommendation or suggestion different than option C? So option C is 52.7 to cover operational shortfall, 8 million for increase in educator compensation, and 4 for curricular updates.
It is exactly 64.
That is exactly what it is.
It is option C.
Yeah.
But
Because yours is
no, but it
basically
wouldn't be the
option.
fund- We didn't talk about the fund balance, so it's not that.
Right, that's not,
C.
no, that is right, because that is taking 9.3 from fund. No, it is taking 9.3 for fund balance for the next school year. That's what, yeah, that's what
It's option C.
the numbers are just a little bit different in the book. 'Cause this says 64.
I don't know.
I just want to make sure.
Dr. Worley, can you ask the full question? I'm not quite following that piece.
I don't think it's option C, because what we just talked about covering was not necessarily the fund balance. It's a kind of option C, but we talked about other priorities.
So in option, when you go to the presentation, it says under option C, it covers the 52.4 million for the operational shortfall. An additional reduction of 9.3 million is taken from the fund balance. So that means we're not replenishing it. And then there's $8 million for teacher. We can clarify that. It's a
Okay,
teacher
that makes sense. All right,
compensation.
all right.
And then 4 million. So it is option C.
It is option C.
It is option C.
Yeah, my only suggestion was just not to pull off that $500,000, but to rather kind of start at the starting line, plus the extra things that we're saying we prioritize, educator or teacher compensation and curricular materials.
And to Eric's point, if we were to step away from open enrollment or drop down, it's going to be at least the first couple of years probably about 500, could be around 500,000.
So we will need to, because we're committed to not dropping under 17% of fund balance, we would need to find those monies elsewhere in the.
So there are gonna be, I mean, there will be cut.
We're gonna have to get efficient anyway, one way or the other. More efficient.
To meet the community request to
Yes.
move away from open enrollment, yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Everybody, of course, wants trust. Okay, so please don't take this in a derogatory way. But if we're in on this and we're not calling the roll on individual programs tonight, but when that day comes for that vote on open enrollment, we have to, what's it called? Fidelity to the plan, right? And if we go wobbly, it all trust starts to, the community starts to go, oh, they said they were going to do this. And now they look at this, they're backtrack, we got.
We should have that vote before November.
I never thought I would be in a position to say we're not agenda for this.
We're not-
Right, I know, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
whatever we do in the future,
Yes.
we need fidelity to, and I never quite understood that word, but now maybe I do. Fidelity to what we're doing tonight
Well,
has to be.
I think what we were saying is there's a potential cost that needs to be in our head.
so I think this is where we can talk about it from an agenda standpoint. The 5 areas of administrative recommendations do have themes. And there's a theme of, we do believe that focusing on a resident-based model and reducing our overall facility footprint is part of our overall recommendation. So there are themes embedded in those 5 areas of transportation, policies, academic and resident enrollment, long-range budget, and long-range facilities. There's a theme of, yes, we believe, and I'm looking at Mr. Pinion. I think the language we want to use is that we would encourage you to maximize the minimum approach within policy 5113. I don't think we want to use the language that we're drawing back on open enrollment. You have to utilize your policy, but we would encourage you, in order to enact what you're describing, you would utilize the minimum approach to 5113. And did I capture that, Mr. Pinion?
Yes, that's accurate. The policy that we updated this last year for open enrollment is in a much better place in terms of standing into a formula, but you could then add, if you would want, that you would be preferring a minimum class size be leveraged in that formula.
I want to be cognizant of not tiptoeing into this. What I will commit to you is that we will have this on an agenda before the end of September.
Idea.
So that the board can articulate public statements. We've heard from the public, and then we can make decisions on this. But that's not for our conversation tonight. It's not on the agenda.
All I mean to say is, not to talk any merits, there are going to be some tough votes coming up.
Yes.
They're going to be hard. And we make them on the facts available at the time, but it's going to be hard.
Where I feel really great about our future, where we're going, is we have an incredible amount of data. We have a comprehensive plan. We have a strategic plan, a facilities plan, the 2075 administrative recommendations, lots of other data points, some of which we talked about tonight. We are situated in a deeply choppy point in Wisconsin finance and in education decision-making to make as good a decisions as we possibly can. And a big thank you to everybody who's put us in this position with a lot of hard work over the last 3 years. If folks are comfortable with this, I'd like to suggest a 10-minute recess for folks to do some thinking about where you're at, clarify if you're thinking, check in with our district team to make sure that you are fully comfortable with whatever is going to be voting on that, because it's a really big decision. We'll be back
At 8:40?
At 8:40.
Has been shared with the board, so you can review it on your own via email.
So we've had a very robust, wide-ranging conversation. We summarized it just before we took a break. I want to check in with folks. Ms. Hummer-Rolland, I will start with you, and then we'll kind of move our way around the table to see if there's any more comments or questions. And then I'm going to call, see if there is any proposed motion to adjust the referendum question as presented.
I don't have anything else.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Mayor?
Still, sincerely, I think we're going to lose votes because the wording of the referendum isn't understandable to a layperson who's not immersed in school district activities.
Put a pin in that. Let's come back.
Okay.
Mr. Morse.
No, no further questions. I would point out that in the calculation summary in there, I think it does a really good job in the calculator showing the property values. And as you look at those, what that looks like, so the base scenarios.
Dr. Worley.
No further questions.
Dr. Jessup, may I ask Mr. Jim Carroll from Beulah Vetter just to come to the microphone to address the language and how the language was structured to align with state statute, so we can understand the recurring language.
Thank you. Mr. Morse.
Yes.
Okay.
Want to make sure we have the
We'll do the best we can.
Yep.
And then that's it, right?
Yep, I'm on the same page.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll, for being here this evening.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Means. Good evening, everyone. I know it's been a long evening so far. I'll try to be concise despite the reputation of my profession. So the point that Mr. Meyer raised earlier about the wording is an understandable one. I appreciate the point. But the language, particularly that reference to non-recurring, is found in the statute that governs this. And so there isn't something in the statute, so I'm clear, that says this is exactly how you must word the referendum language. But this is a very standard way of wording it. And it does, I think, need to reference that non-recurring concept, which really, when in the context of that statute, recurring means permanent and non-recurring means for a limited time frame. I know you may say, well, that sounds a little weird, but that is the way that the statute is written and then the way that it has been interpreted. So that's why when we were assisting the administration in drafting the language, we did use that phrasing. And I think, obviously, anytime you have a referendum, part of your goal and your task is to educate the public about the specifics of the referendum. And I think that's obviously something that will be your challenge in the next few months, assuming that you decide to go forward with a referendum. But that's just a little background. I probably broke my promise to be concise, but
As I read it, I understand that, yes, the tax is non-recurring, but when we get to the use, that's where, to us, a building is non-recurring, but to the community, a building means a mortgage. And of course, that recurs for 20 years of my mortgage. So to get them to understand what it is we're doing, I see we need to say that the tax is non-recurring. But, salaries, in fact, legally, well, they're kind of not recurring because you can non-renew contracts, you can eliminate positions, but from a financial planning point of view, a salary is recurring if we have a stability in our organization. So that's where the problem was, I believe.
Is it the word purposes
You know,
that is tripping up people? Because it sounds like they're non-recurring purposes, but then the list is
yeah,
recurring. So it
sounded
might
like
be the
that.
word
Yeah.
purposes, not the non-recurring that's actually catching.
Right, and so if there was a way to break them to different phrases, do you see what I'm saying? I'm really.
I think so too. I think it could be really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And the title also is for recurring purposes up at the top, the all caps.
yeah, I think that is just a typo, or that should say non-recurring. Yep.
But I agree with what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, that I think what we want to articulate is it's a non-recurring referendum. It's not like this ongoing referendum forever. It's a non-recurring referendum to pay
operational
for
expenses.
ongoing operational expenses.
Or something, or just that, because the wording allows me to assume that the money and the use are in concept connected when they're not. And then I get confused. And then what happens when a voter goes into the ballot and, into the voting booth and now they're reading it and I don't.
You're not
Now,
sure what it
do they
means, you
do when
tend
they
to vote
really
no.
don't know?
Mhm.
They can't figure out what it really means. That was my concern.
No, understood. And obviously you want it to be clear. I think I would suggest that you leave the for non-recurring purposes where it is, but I think perhaps you could say for non-recurring purposes consisting of funding ongoing operational expenses, et cetera, or something along those lines.
Whatever you think. I don't have the words because if I chose words, I could easily create something that was not in legal compliance. Right?
No, I get it.
I
I
can't
get
pick
it.
the words either,
And I appreciate your
I
recognition.
like that addition that you just said,
Mhm.
because then that takes out the feeling that the non-recurring purposes are the operational expenses. I think that's where we're getting stuck.
I mean, I try to keep it as simple. I always like to make fewer changes rather than more changes. So I think even if you just added consisting of funding operational expenses, because I think I know I said ongoing, but that could perhaps cause confusion as well. So I think
You added funding.
I would add
Funding.
funding and then between of and operational. And I'm comfortable with that.
You're, to Mr. Meyer's point, if you're comfortable with it, we're comfortable.
I understand the point, and I suggest that you keep that for non-recurring purposes where it is, but I would add that word. I think that helps to clarify without convoluting.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion for that when the time comes?
Well,
When the time comes.
And if I might just very briefly, just to make clear that your process here is actually to adopt two resolutions, assuming that someone makes such a motion. But the first resolution is to essentially say we want to take this action. And the second, and that's consistent with the document that we were just talking about, the initial resolution, so-called. And then the second resolution is to put it to a referendum. So you're saying we are recommending this action, and then the second, and this is consistent with the second attachment that's in your materials, is titled "Resolution Providing for a Referendum Election." And so on and so forth. So I just want to make that clear that you actually will need two motions, one for each of these resolutions. And of course, if you're going to use a number, a yearly amount that's different than what's in the materials, then you'll have to reflect that in your motions as well.
Could they both be done in one? I know we need two motions because there's the little short paper and the long paper. There's lay terms, right? And
you're not wrong.
And so we want to add a couple word or two, and maybe we want to change the number. Can they change the word and change the number be one motion for each of the two?
Sure. I think yes, you can do that altogether, but I would keep the short one and the long one. I'd keep those separate.
Okay.
In fact, you should keep those.
They're different action items, right?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But they are obviously part of the same, I guess you could say, package, but you do have to do them separately. And just for what it's worth, I won't go into it, but similar process for the next agenda item as well.
Mr. Meyer and others who've asked this question about clarity. How this would now read would be it resolved by the school board of the Wauwatosa School District, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, that the district shall be authorized to exceed the statutory revenue limit by dollar amount per year, beginning with the 2025-2026 school year and ending with the 2028-2029 school year for non-recurring purposes consisting of funding operational expenses, including salaries, benefits, and the instructional and co-curricular programming.
That one
I
word
like
makes a
that.
difference.
It really does. I like that.
Okay.
So thank you for that, Mr. Meyer.
I didn't have an answer.
That's why we want to counsel
they don't
here.
understand.
Thank you for raising that up.
The only other thing I would note is just as was pointed out, that I would just note that it should be in the title, non-recurring.
I was going to ask, is that
Yeah.
because it's been
That was
presented this way, we would need to make that as part of the.
Yep, I would just clarify that.
amendment.
it's the title, so it may not actually, I would just clean it up. That's what I'm saying, basically.
So there would be between of and operational, the word funding would be inserted,
Correct.
that we would put non in front of recurring.
In the title of the item, yes.
And then, is there anything else in terms of language before we return to the topic of the number? Seeing none, let's return to the topic of the number. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll see you again in a bit.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not going anywhere.
I would like to propose that the number be amended to, I think if I'm doing the math right, please check me on this.
And Dr. Hoyt, I'm going to ask you to actually say this is a motion, because then that will provide us the opportunity to have a second, to have board discussion, and to either adopt, amend, or reject the motion.
I would like to make a motion to amend the initial resolution draft to change the wording so that it says exceed the statutory revenue limit rather than by $12,100,000 per year. I would like to change that dollar amount to 16 million. 16,100,000 per year.
Second, that motion.
Did you catch that?
Yes, this is a motion to amend the initial resolution draft to change the wording to say exceed the statutory revenue limit. Change it from 12.1 million to 16.1 million per year.
Outstanding. We have a motion and a second on the floor. It's now to board discussion. Mr. Meyer.
Based on the experience and hindsight and regrets of our ask in the 2018 referendum, I believe we should make our full ask. And that's what this is, correct? This is the highest of the amounts?
This is the full ask.
Okay, and we need to make the full ask and find out. So there's no regrets. Okay.
Well, I think I would speak for Mr. Brightman. I don't know if it's the full ask. The full ask would be replenishing the $9.3 million in fund balance that we're utilizing, putting it back. And so so I would just state, I don't know if this is the full ask, but this is very healthy and would position our school district well.
What this ask would deliver is it would deliver continuing to do what we are doing today, programmatically, curricular. Not that we wouldn't make changes as we would expect the district to always do, which was to pursue the strategic plan, prioritize funding, sunset programs that aren't effective and aligned with the strategic plan and the North Star. But it would fund at the current level the district is funded. It would continue to invest in compensation, increasing compensation for our educators who are high-touch student positions. And it would provide resources to ensure that the curriculum continues to be updated over the next 4 years for our 7-year curriculum review cycle. And what I heard from the board that is included here, but as an aside, we need more resources going towards academic intervention for students performing at the lowest levels. That 10% isn't cutting it. We want more resources there. We would be asking them to figure it out and deliver that to the board. Not part of this, but that's there. So that's where we are. Discussion on that item. Are you ready to call the roll?
And this does not fix the wording because she didn't read the new wording. Only fixes.
Your choice, you could amend the amendment, or you could call the roll on this amendment, then entertain a second amendment.
I'm going to call the roll on this and entertain a second.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to make sure that people are aware.
Thank you. So this would change 12.1 to 16, 12.1, not 12.1, 12.1, 12,100,000 to 16,100,000. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes. The motion passes. May I call for a motion to clean up language for non-recurring in the title, adding funding between of and operational?
Motion to change as discussed with the attorney and as read couple minutes ago by the board president.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig.
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes. And that motion passes. So we are then back with the updated item.
We're on
We're still at 3.
the second item on 3 now. Right.
We have adopted the change in language. I believe we actually have to adopt and pass the full referendum as updated. The short, I think we still have the initial resolution authorizing the school district budget.
Yeah.
We've adjusted the language on that, but now we have to adopt it.
Right.
That's correct.
So can we make a motion to adopt both amendments from the previous action item?
I think you've already adopted the amendments to the document, so you would now be making a motion. Someone would presumably be making a motion to actually adopt the resolution as previously amended.
Yep, and we have a first and a second and had board discussion, and then we made 2 motions to adjust it.
Right. So now I would still just adopt the
Reread
full, the reworded and up resolution, which includes both the changes to the language, so to speak, and the change to the amount. And then once that occurs, presumably, then you would also want to adopt the second document with a change to reflect what's in the initial resolution.
We just adopted the first document.
No, we didn't finish.
We didn't actually adopt it. We've adopted the change.
Oh, I got mixed up.
So now we would say, yeah.
I'm gonna go back to
Now
Dr.
call-
Boyd,
okay.
who read the initial.
So just say as amended,
Not fair.
as previously amended. That was the language
As
he just gave us.
previously-
So you'd like to
Yeah.
adopt the initial resolution, but now as previously amended.
I would like to adopt the initial motion,
It's called the initial
the
resolution.
initial resolution as previously amended. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any board discussion on this item? So a reminder for the board and the community, we are adopting our motion, which has been amended twice. First amendment is from 12,100,000, adjusting to 16,100,000. And then the second amendment was to change from recurring to non-recurring in the title and adding funding between of and operation. Just want to make sure
Bringing these together.
we are bringing it all together and putting a bow on it.
This is for the short paper, right?
This is for the short
For the
paper.
short paper.
That's correct.
How sophisticated is that, right? The short paper. Okay.
Ms. Summers, please put it.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig.
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes, the resolution passes. The second item, action to approve a resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limits for non-recurring purposes.
Can we read it?
Would you mind just, I think both to make sure the board feels really comfortable and then the community understands what this does, and I know we have to make a change to our number. We'll have to have a motion to make a change, amend the number that we're putting on the ballot.
So, sorry. So thank you. So what you're doing now is the board has adopted a resolution to potentially increase its budget beyond the revenue limits by the stated amount of 16.1 million for each of the 4 years stated. So what you're doing now is adopting a resolution to put that, I guess you could call it request from the board to the electorate in a referendum. So that's what this second resolution does. And I think what you can do is move to adopt the resolution document that was a part of your materials, subject to the amendments that were made to the initial resolution. Does that make sense? Okay, so that would reflect that the most importantly, that the amount has changed, has increased from the 12,100,000 per year to the 16,100,000 per year. You could, I suppose, read this entire 2-page document into the record. I don't think you need to do so unless that's a typical practice of yours. But I think you just want to make it clear, as you said, both for the members of the board and for the members of the community, that this is the second part of this 2-step process. We decide we want to do something, and then we're taking it to the electorate to seek their approval at a referendum.
And on page 5, it would also be inserting that word funding.
And those are correct.
Okay.
Right. And those exhibits that are attached, right. So that's a good point. I think you could make the motion to amend the document as well as its attachments consistent with consistent with the initial resolution. I know this gets a little squirrely, but that's, I think, the way to do it.
So what if we said motion to adopt as noticed and as amended in the earlier resolution? Something like that.
Something like that. But I would just reference that you want it to be consistent with the initial resolution as amended.
So as noticed.
Well, not even as amended. It's the initial resolution now. It is what it is.
Okay.
So consistent with the initial resolution. Yep.
Okay. So this is the enabling.
Essentially, right.
The enabling piece.
That now this has to, and then there's a whole process as is outlined here of notices that have to go out and sort of that statutory process that's required of not just this type of referendum, but of all referenda.
So the first one, when amended, poured its amendments into the second one. Kind of, sort of.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah, I'll buy that.
Another technical term, kind of, sort of. But okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a legal term too. Yeah.
We'd like to take a stab at making that motion.
So do we need the and attachments?
I would include that
Okay,
reference.
just want to make sure, yeah.
Yep. Thank you for pointing that out. I would include that.
Yes, for sure.
Just the whole point is to put it right on the record as your legal counsel. You want it all to be consistent with the action that that you already took, and you want it to be clear what you're asking the voters to decide.
That's right. May I have a motion to amend?
I would move to amend the resolution to reflect for the resolution and its attachments to reflect the language that we adopted in the initial resolution. Is that close enough?
That's fine. And then I think you can also, as part of your motion, move to adopt it. I guess you could do it as 2 separate items, first amend it and then adopt it, or you can.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a motion to amend.
Mhm.
May I have a second?
We haven't moved to put anything in discussion
You're
in
right.
order to amend it,
Oh, right.
right? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So if you could,
So I could just move the whole thing.
you could,
Okay.
I would think, move for the document and attachments as amended or as whatever, as,
To match.
Well, I think
yeah.
this all, even though I've been to a few meetings in my day, but these always get tricky. I think what you can do is simply move to adopt the resolution as amended, consistent with your initial the referendum
I
resolution.
think that's what I said.
Yeah.
It is basically what I said.
Yep.
I mean, I have no basis to know anything would happen where somebody would legally challenge it, but you're here to, under the abundance of caution, let's just assume somebody's gonna come after this.
So you'd like to put it on the table first and then.
Well, I would
amend it.
just want to be.
That's fine.
In
I'm
the law
comfortable with
books, it was called, Mr. Abundance of Caution.
Okay, then I'm going to move that we put the resolution for providing a referendum election on the question of the approval, on the table. That we move, I'm going to move that we pass it, and I'm open to amendments.
May I have a second?
Second, like he's got.
Mr. Meyer, please call the roll.
But yeah.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Miss Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Miss Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes.
Didn't we want to put the discussion to amend it? So it's on the table.
So it's on the table.
Well,
So-
table means something else.
I mean, it's under consideration now.
Discussion, yeah.
I'm probably for discussion. So do you want to call for discussion?
We just adopted it. correct?
Yeah, that's what didn't make sense to me.
So now we would need to
Well, we don't need to discuss it then.
amend. It's been adopted as amended.
Yeah,
been
that's
adopted.
what I thought.
That's what
So
my
there is no
original request
discussion.
was.
There's no, that it's
We
done,
just
it's
adopted
over.
it.
We move on to the next, I guess.
So your motion was to adopt it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna. That's why I wasn't sure. I thought that we were just putting it up to discuss.
Yeah, I was thinking it was just to discuss it. So
That's why when you called the roll, it was a little confusing to me.
We should just do this in multiple steps and read the
Yeah.
original, like
Yeah.
the original way it's written, then we move
Yeah.
to amend it, we
Yeah.
vote on that, then we
Yeah.
move to adopt it. We should
Yeah.
do all that.
that is probably the most cautious.
That's what I thought we were trying to do.
We need to move to reconsider.
Correct.
I offer a motion to reconsider the previously adopted.
May I have a second?
Second.
Do I need to call the roll on that?
Mhm.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Miss Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Miss Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. So what we need is a motion, a second, and then we will consider amendments.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So the motion is to consider the resolution.
Yeah,
It is recommended that the school board approve a resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limits for non-recurring purposes, and I so move.
second.
No, you can discuss.
So I'd like to offer an amendment to that.
There we go.
Yes.
I'd like to offer the amendment that this resolution that we're considering be amended to reflect the changes that we made in the initial resolution, and that be in a resolution, in our resolution and in its attachments.
We have a second.
Second.
Or discussion. Legal counsel, are you comfortable with how we have processed this?
I am. Thank you for your patience as we wound our way through this, but I'm comfortable with the process.
We only do this once every 6 years, so.
Right.
Well, for now, yeah.
Hadn't done it in 3 decades.
Yeah, before that, yeah.
Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Miss Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Miss Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And that item passes. Thank you all for a really robust conversation, discussion on those action items. We next are to number 4, facilities expense resolution, vote and action items. Would someone like to read this item?
It is recommended that the school board approve an initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $60 million, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
I'll be I can be very succinct. The documents have been updated. Our goal is to make sure that all of our elementary schools and our high schools meet the 2010 ADA standards. I think legally, we have to be very clear, and in fact, Ms. Sarah Ellis, Mr. Brightman, and I were on another call today with our legal counsel. There's two different layers of ADA work. We can make our facilities ADA compliant. That means if you have a need for an accommodation, you can have a facility that's ADA compliant. Madison Elementary School is technically ADA compliant, in that if there was someone who has an ADA need, they would have to identify it to us, and then we would adjust accordingly. We believe that it's important to make all of our facilities ADA standard, and the standards that were identified by the federal government in 2010 is our goal. That is our focus with this request. So that's the first part of this facilities referendum request. ADA standards, 2010 ADA standards for our elementary and high schools. The second component of it is we do believe, I've stated for almost a year now, I do believe that all of our elementary schools need to remain open. The junior kindergarten through sixth grade model does afford us the ability to keep all of our elementary schools open. If we're going to keep our elementary schools open, then we do need to address our deferred maintenance issues. I want to be very clear. I think Mr. Fountain would tell us that there is a caveat. There's an asterisk with the number that we've identified for deferred maintenance. That's not counting our safety, security audit needs. That's not counting some ongoing foundational work that's happening at Jefferson Elementary School. And there's one more component, Kevin, that I may be forgetting. And Whitman wouldn't fall into this category.
No, but Jefferson's primary.
But Jefferson's the primary. So I just want to be transparent with the board. The numbers that we've identified for deferred maintenance does not include the security audit identified needs, and it does not identify an ongoing analysis of the foundation at Jefferson. And that's at Longfellow, so that also does not fall into this. Yep. So we're in essence saying we want to address our deferred maintenance at the elementary schools, and we want to address all of our ADA standard needs at our elementary schools and our two high schools. That's what we're asking for. And that dollar amount equates out to $60 million. Now, you may be asking, we may be getting to referendum fatigue, and why don't we just ask for it all now? We believe that moving to any model, be it a 7-12 model where the 7th and 8th graders are in our high schools. I think last week, Monday, we heard a recommendation of looking at having a junior high model where all the 7th and 8th graders are in their own facility. All those different conversations, we believe, will require ongoing community discussion. And to have those discussions now would just feel rushed, and we would not give the type of attention that we need to give to it. We do know that there's opportunity to go to a junior high. I call it a junior high model where there's a 7-8 model. But there's also the ability for us to look at a 7-9 building and then having a 10-12 building. There's a lot of variations we could get into. We think that having a more robust community-wide conversation around what that model looks like would be prudent. We educationally believe that the model that we've suggested and recommended is the best model, but it does require a phase 1 and a phase 2. And we've learned from the 2018 model that sometimes when you talk about multiple phases in a community, people tend to forget that there's multiple phases ensuing. Nonetheless, what we're suggesting is that the most immediate needs is around the $60 million that would address, if I'm doing again, here's another math problem. It would be a total of $15 million of ADA needs at one level, $13 million of ADA needs at another level of our schools, And then a total of, I believe that would be $32 million of deferred maintenance at the elementary schools. I think the $15 million is ADA needs at the high schools. And then 13 million is ADA standards at the elementary schools. Those are the three things we're asking for.
Mr. Meyer.
So let's assume this referendum, we approve it tonight and it passes in November. Then you start spending money. And 2 years later, the phase 2 referendum fails. Have we put money into stuff from this November's referendum that, let's say all disaster happens and now we do have to start closing buildings that, do you know what, are we going to start sinking money into stuff from the $60 million referendum that's at risk that it'll be throwaway later on? Like, you know, from the 2018 referendum, we spent a lot of money repairing Roosevelt. If we came along now and right now started we said we were going to build up a new Roosevelt, we would have thrown away all that money we spent to upgrade Roosevelt. So it's kind of a similar kind of question. You kind of have to know the future in order to know how to answer the question. So maybe it's just a silly question for me.
No, I know the future because you've charged us to do a comprehensive plan. So my response would be, if the 2026 referendum failed and the $270 million that we believe we need to make our high schools modern learning environments, if that fails, then you would have 2 middle schools, Whitman and Longfellow, with less students in it. And you would have 4 secondary schools that are woefully under resourced in terms of being modern learning spaces. You would have a middle school in Longfellow that has a swimming pool that needs $10 million of repairs in it. You would have 2 high schools that have not had any substantial additions or renovations to the instructional areas in over 50 years. That's what happens if phase 2 of the 2026 referendum doesn't pass. So you would have Longfellow, just to recap, Longfellow and Whitman would have less students in it because—
And they would not be ADA.
They would, so Whitman and Longfellow would not be ADA standard. And they would have less students in them because we have committed to keeping our elementary schools open. So the 6th grade students are already they're at the elementary schools now. So that you have more space, you have access space really at the 2 middle schools, and you have now kicked the can down the road even further on Wauwatosa East and Wauwatosa West. You would be coming up on 100 years celebration of Wauwatosa East. It was built in 1927 and no substantial additions. You would have, at that point, you would have a boiler system that is circa 1972.
I'm not saying make the case for the—
I'm not making a case. I'm just, you asked me to give you the future.
I'm saying if we go out in the community supporting a yes vote on the $60 million referendum, and people say, I hope you're not going to put that into stuff that gets thrown away in 2 or 3 years on your next referendum. That's the basic question.
By not doing the ADA standard at the middle schools, we're not because, right, we'd have to do that. We'd have to do that in 2 years. If we don't do it now. But I think that to your question, what is the district is proposing is useful
for the long term.
For the long term. That's how I read it.
We're doing the best we can to manage uncertainty.
And it's not only useful, it's necessary to not wait for 2 years in order to do the deferred maintenance and the ADA standard. I'm just saying, again, it's really important that we do this now. That's why we're phasing.
Just before I vote, I want to understand what my narrative is going to be in the community. Yeah, assuming it passes.
Right. I wasn't trying to persuade you, Mr. Meyer.
No, I know you weren't, but I needed help for the narrative.
Yes.
You
asked a really good question of what happens if phase 2 doesn't pass. We have a plan for it.
Okay, there is a plan, and we're going to do the best we can to not have throwaways.
But I guess to answer your question succinctly, the first step of phase 2 is to have a community-wide conversation. And my vision is that this time next year, we would start having a community-wide conversation of, because while we have the recommendation of the 7-12 model, there are people who are suggesting, as I just stated, other models of how we can configure our secondary schools. Our point is we can't continue to ignore the investment of our secondary schools. And so whatever that looks like, be it our phase 2 or other models that have been posed, we would want to have a community-wide conversation.
I think you need to start the conversation before. I wouldn't wait a year, so you only have a year left.
If we started,
That's for another meeting, but I think we need to start day one so people don't forget that we always said there would be a 2026 question.
I think we have to,
right?
So you just passed an operating referendum. You may pass a facilities referendum. I think the runway of doing that work first
yes,
is what we need to address.
Right.
Once we get past that, I think, in June of 2025, that's still a long runway from November of 26.
I mean, as soon as you can.
I understand.
Because I'm
Yes.
always, where the lessons learned from last time.
You're right.
Didn't start soon enough.
You're right.
Now we know, right? Just like I said, let's ask for the whole thing because we learned last time. And
When you don't do a referendum for 30,
yeah,
you forget how to do it.
we're out of practice, right?
But back to Mr. Meyer's original point, Dr. Means, the 32 plus the 13 invested in the elementary schools and the 15 invested in the high schools is investments that are necessary and build a base, a foundation for whatever decision we make later on.
Yes.
Thank you.
I want to ask a quick follow-up question because I haven't asked this before publicly or privately. So West, if we move forward as a wing, I get that would be built up to current ADA standards. For East, there would be a substantial, what's currently proposed, and we could go we could go several different directions.
You don't use them.
Is a full renovation of that building. Is there any cost that we'd be putting into East right now that if the referendum passes would be investing 2 years before we do the full thing?
Yeah, that was my question.
Where there would be, which is kind of the opposite of if it doesn't pass. I want to know if it does pass, is this indeed building on the base? Or is this something, I both want to do these now and I don't want to do something that is then undone.
The $15 million invested in the high school's ADA standard work is work that needs to be done immediately. And it would just be less work that we would have to do for Wauwatosa East and West moving forward if there was a phase 2.
Okay.
And yes, the price tag of $180 million may be eye-popping to people for Wauwatosa East. Typically, to build a brand new high school from scratch is $150 million. When you are trying to do a retrofit of a school like Wauwatosa East, that there's added costs. Of that $180 million, I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $22 million is just for the third floor at East to make that 60,000 square feet usable again.
And one of the questions I will have when we consider the next phase is not just what is the cost to renovate East, but alternatively, as we consider other options, what's the amount of renovating East and Longfellow? Because lots of variables, but the do nothing isn't like.
It's actually, you have that answer. So on page 6 of the long range facilities plan, you will see what the deferred maintenance costs are for each one of our schools. And if I remember correctly, the deferred maintenance for the 2 middle schools. Longfellow is 15 million alone in terms of the deferred maintenance.
And that's just deferred maintenance.
That's just deferred maintenance.
That's not creating spaces for the next 50 years that will be effective in educating our kids.
That includes ADA costs though. Remember that full deferred maintenance list would include all of the ADA updates to those schools too.
Actually it doesn't. I'm trying to find it now.
Schools altogether are 7.9 on ADA. Whole lot of this.
And that's not what we're voting on tonight. But I think the big picture is we have a lot of conversation as a community is what our secondary model will look like.
You're right, Ms. Heimer-Rowan. Let me apologize. The 15 million is deferred maintenance and ADA. So it includes both. Thank you. I'm sorry. I apologize. I had to find those numbers. So that's including ADA 2010 accessible ADA standards and deferred maintenance.
We are not voting on that this evening.
No.
That's not in the 60s.
Ms. Heimer-Rowan,
High
you are
school and
clearly in the
elementary.
depth.
It's only high school and elementary.
Oh, it is.
But we're asking what we're not
bad.
voting on, so we know what we are voting.
Yeah.
Right?
So what we are voting on, ADA standards, elementary and high school, across all schools, deferred maintenance, elementary school.
Yes.
But there is an
60.
assumption, I think, to Mr. Meyer's point. We're sort of making an assumption that we should invest in East to at least make it ADA accessible,
Mhm.
but not Longfellow right now.
Because
Because the
that's still
assumption
in
is that
play.
we're assuming
Yeah.
East stays open, Longfellow may or may not stay open.
Right, and that's, so we are, as much as is possible, not knowing the future, we're trying to address it, but it won't be perfect.
Yeah.
Because it can't, because we don't know really what's gonna happen.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Heimer-Rowan?
Yeah, so all I would add is for community members who are listening, all of the deferred maintenance costs are outlined per or by school in the big document of the facilities plan. So if the referendum if this passes, then community members will have a snapshot of what is actually covered, and not a snapshot. They'll have a detailed picture of what is included in that total.
And I think yes, Ms. Heimer-Rowan, I should never doubt you ever. And I think the language we've been using in the office is that we're using 2026 numbers. So those figures are based on 2026 figures. If you continue to push out this conversation, then the numbers that we're estimating will change. So again, on page 6 of the long range facilities document, it outlines the dollar amount for both Longfellow and Whitman in terms of how much those costs. In those deferred maintenance costs, we've added the ADA is embedded in those overall deferred maintenance costs.
So why have we used 2026 numbers?
Looking at a potential referendum, capital improvement referendum in 2024 and then again in 2026. If there was a 2026 referendum, we would want to go to, and it's going to be fast. We're not quite sure we would be able to hold on to those 2026 figures, because if we went to bid, that bidding process is going to probably bleed into 2027 in some instances. And so those numbers continue to be refined over time.
So, and I know the community is often asked, like, how does this all play out? And be transparent, show your work, make sure you go get multiple bids. That occurred for the last referendum. It will occur for this referendum. And we will see everything as well as the community on all board agendas and everything else. What we're doing. We will see the bids, and all of that will unfold if we place it on the ballot and the ballot passes. All that will be shared explicitly, and in fact is in where these numbers came from in the long range facilities plan. In fact, the long range facilities plan, if people really wanted to know what was going on, not only articulates what is being asked for tonight, it talks about the next 40 years in the plans for how all schools will be updated over the next 4 decades, and a general overview of the timing of that. So everything is out there for the community to review in thorough detail. Dr. Hood.
Dr. Means, question about, we get a lot of questions about where the 2018 referendum money went. Because we're specifically talking, I think we can all agree at the elementary level, we know where a lot of that money went to in rebuilding several schools. There have been questions about where did the ADA piece of that referendum go? Can you speak to that? And also, can we then be just really intentional as we move forward about we've got really great transparency that the the TOSA 2075 page that's out now on the school district website is like really thorough and has links to lots of things. And my hope is that we can just kind of continue to use that as a place for people to find information and to know, for example, that we are thinking about this in a phased and ongoing phases. If we are a community that wants to have 100-year-old buildings, we have to continue to invest in our old buildings. But
So,
anyway, to the ADA point,
yes. On our webpage, if you go to the TOSA 2075 page, there's information out there. There was also a document, a form that showed where the approximately $32 million of funds that came from that 2018 referendum went to, that was not invested in the construction of the 4 new buildings. So I'm trying to find that document. If Ms. Ellis is on the line, if she could direct me to that form. But you've all seen it. There's a document where it shows, there's orange dots that shows where the projects were for each of the remaining buildings across the district. That's where we've accounted for the dollars that went to the buildings from the 2018 referendum. That's how we accounted for it.
Page
Now,
22.
Was that?
It's slide 22 in that presentation.
Oh, thank you.
where can you direct me to that, Mr. Morris?
Public facing board retreat PTA presentation on the, when I get here, on the community presentation, when you go to on the district website.
2075?
Yeah.
And what was the date of that meeting?
Oh, I'm on the website. On page.
Homepage, click learn more. View community presentation, the big blue bar. So homepage.
Fine.
And then which slide was it? Just
22.
22. So for people following along, slide 22.
To the 2075, not the task force page, but the new.
The website, district website.
Right there, new TOSA 2075. Scroll down, go to view community presentation. Then slide 22.
That document has been utilized significantly, and that is where we account for where all the projects were invested in.
Okay, so there are several schools that were, where there were ADA upgrades. So improved access to main building entrance at Eisenhower, Montessori, Roosevelt, and Washington. And accessibility lifts and or fixtures at Eisenhower, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Washington, and I can't see this, East. So that's for people who have the question, where did the money go?
That's where the money went. And I think the way.
That's the last 2 rows in the table. Just for
And
people
so
who-
when people talk about the language in these resolutions, that's why we've been very explicit in saying we want to meet ADA standards. So the language from 2018 was accurate. I think there's a perception that, well, we invested those funds in 2018 that should have gotten us to ADA standard. It didn't say that in the resolution. So we're being very transparent. We're being very upfront, and we've made a commitment of meeting ADA standards. Here it is. So if you want to hold us accountable, that the language is in the resolution.
So does that mean, instead of it being like, okay, the main entrance is now accessible, ADA standards means the whole building meets ADA accessibility standards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think 6 years ago, I didn't have the sophistication that's in the conversation now. So people said ADA stuff. Wonderful. I have ADA stuff. I didn't know all this. Should I have known? Well, fault me if I should have, but I didn't. So here's part of my trust. I'm just going to put it out here, folks, transparent. I thought we were fine. I didn't know anything as much then as I know now hearing this.
So the standard has been clearly elevated from that time to where I am now in this seat. Number one. Number two, the ADA standards are from 2010. So the argument we hear from community members, I agree, and I'm aligned with those community members. The ADA standards were identified in 2010. You went to referendum in 2018. That aside, what I like to always say is that there were good people here prior to my arrival. They did the very best they could do at that time. We know more, and there's that old adage of when you know better, you do better. And so what we're suggesting is that if we're going to maintain our elementary schools and keep them open, they should be ADA standard. And if the high schools are, and the high schools clearly need to be ADA standard.
And then it was explicitly the strategy to ask for the money we thought would get approved. It was not the strategy to ask for the money for what we need. There was what we needed, it was priority, and then how much of it will the community pay for? And then there was a line where it stopped. And we're approaching it differently now.
And I will say, so I was brand new when I entered the board. I think maybe the first or second meeting I was sitting on the board was the presentation to the board from the Community-Driven Facilities Committee. Mr. Meyer was the board liaison to that group. They had done maybe 2 years of work leading up to it.
Long time, yeah.
And the only way everything would have been done is if the community would have agreed in 2017 dollars to fund $350 million. The community funded 125. So even as a new board member, it was very clear to me that the district had determined in the facilities committee with all the community input that there was 4 schools that had major needs that we didn't want to throw good money after bad money after good.
Whatever, we get you. Yeah.
And so better to invest in 4 full rebuilds because it was better to rebuild. You're going to save money in the long run. And then everything else that we could do was stretched to the greatest degree on all those other areas. And I will say ADA was really important at the time. School safety was and continues to be really important. Some learning environment stuff, making sure that HVAC was in place. So everywhere the facilities team came back to the board at that time in 2017 was, how do we maximize that $124.9 million to solve $350 million of problems?
So stuff was sprinkled around.
Stuff was sprinkled around.
Not to solve problems, but to sprinkle around.
And Mr. Meyer, I remember sitting here in this room with you, and I remember Mr. Rolland at the time was pained because he just couldn't get over that the east boiler was not addressed in this. Did it need to be? Yep. Did we have enough money to do it? Nope. And you have talked repeatedly about we should have asked for money for Roosevelt and for Washington.
Yep.
And we knew that the community was going to fully support 124.9. Anything beyond that, we didn't know. And so I empathize and understand. And I understand that people were like, we thought it was going to take care of everything. I understand that. I don't know how anyone came to that conclusion when we spent $125 million to solve $350 million worth of problems. And I know that people are busy, that there was a pandemic, that things have been complicated.
And this is not to fault us or them back then. We have been more experienced now with doing this. We now know people won't understand. The advocates for students with disabilities here, we're not frustrated with you. We're frustrated that these needs weren't met, just like you are, and we are listening to you, right? We are. And we have lessons learned, what we think we're understanding what happened last time, and we're trying to behave differently this time. Is that a fair?
Mr. Brightman and I went to a meeting, I want to say in May, it may have been in May, late April, May, and it was a tough meeting. I tend to have those. And that community clearly stated that they were disappointed that ADA standards were not prioritized in that remaining funds from the 2018 referendum. The argument that they made was after you built the 4 new schools, your priority should have been just to make sure that you meet the 2010 ADA standards for the remaining buildings. That didn't happen. And Mr. Brightman and I weren't here. We don't know. I believe the people who are here are good people and they meant well. But we took the feedback that was expressed to us, and it's expressed in these resolutions of we're living up to our word. We want all of our schools to be ADA standard. We do believe that we can reduce our footprint from the middle school model by relocating the middle schools. That's why that's not identified in this referendum. We do believe that there's an opportunity, but you're right, Mr. Meyer. People have been heard. We've received the feedback. We are suggesting that we address immediately the ADA standards at our elementary schools and our high schools right away.
I think one thing I would add there is that when you look at this, and all the stuff that, to your point, Mr. Meyer, that we've learned since those times back then, we're addressing stuff right now in 2024 to get us to a 2010 ADA standard. I'm just doing math from what was the 1991 standard to 2010. That 19 years goes by. If we look at another 19, that's 2029. We very well could learn something in these next 3, 4, 5 years that there's a 2029 or a 2027 standard that not negates what we're doing.
Sure.
But there are things we're going to learn. And I know our advocates have brought up things about things that are happening in 2024, like accessibility with screens and audio and different means that are not a part of that 2010 because that technology didn't exist. So as we go forward, I think what's important is that we're recognizing those things. We're transparent. To your point, Dr. Means, there in 2018, I don't know what the language of the words were. According to this, it could have been as simple as ADA accessibility upgrades. That sounds great. We thought that was not everything, but close. We're being very clear that where we're going is to bring everything up to that 2010 standard. And then as we continue to push forward, we're not forgetting about the ones. It's not a one and done. It's not an end all be all. We recognize that just like bringing up going from that 10 to 25% of our bottom, that our ADA, we're going to continue moving them forward as we continue to grow and meet those needs there, no matter what they look like.
You know, I think I'll say something tough here. We have capacity to goof this up again. If we don't focus, right, the election next spring, a couple new board members, and then suddenly we have something, right? We always want to believe that focus means we can focus on many, many things. But Dr. Means said earlier, if you tell me to focus on what the bottom 10%, it will be to the exclusion of other things. So maybe we need to come up with our short list of focus and be sure ADA is on it. So we keep the visibility, or we'll lose the visibility, and then not because anybody wanted it to slide to the sidelines, it will.
But we think we did that with the recommendation by clearly stating ADA standard work is the focus of this $60 million referendum. We identified 2 things. Make sure that all of our elementaries address their deferred maintenance and ADA standards at our elementary and secondary. Our high schools.
And there were 2 items that are not included because they're not yet costed out and we're learning more about them in real time. 1, Jefferson Foundation. And what was the second?
Security upgrade.
The security
Based on the
audit
security
upgrades.
audit. Yeah.
So that's another one where if we want to make those changes, we're going to have to find money in the budget that exists.
May I offer a clarification?
You should probably come to the microphone.
The comment was made, does this bring all of the facilities up to standards completely?
Mm-hmm.
And I just consulted with Nick Kent because I had a problem with that statement. To the order of some doors and some of the more complicated bathroom situations, those might, in the words of Nick, it would require a modernization of the building more on the lines of Lincoln and Wilson. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Lines
of what? Oh, what happened in Lincoln and Wilson? So
We might not be able to renovate to that same.
I think his point is to the best that you can within the limitations of those facilities that they have.
When you say that, I'm imagining the third floor of Roosevelt that has multiple steps up in every bathroom. I don't know if that's what he's referring to.
I think that's what he's referring to, the Washington and Roosevelt example.
So what you're saying is, for example, in that bathroom, you, like it, that wouldn't get to ADA accessibility standards. But would there then be?
I think every effort would be, but more discovery would have to happen, but I don't want to. I think Nick and I are cautious to say that the building is fully ADA standard because of the limitations of the structure itself.
But I would want to make sure that there was like a bathroom on the third floor of Roosevelt that.
And there may not be. Because
I think every effort would be made to have that happen. I think that statement's a pretty strong statement that needs to have a clarifying sentence next to it.
And I understand that because when you think about ramp angles and everything else, I just spent a weekend with my father who's navigating angles and mobility issues of there may not be the ability in some of our old buildings without a full redesign of the third floor or a new building. And I get that. So this is the decision of like, is like, I remember when we toured Lincoln, when I first was a board member, there was no easy solutions to a lot of the ADA accessibility issues unless you just redid the whole building. There's a lot of workarounds, there's creative solutions. And is it fair to say that that 95+% of all issues around ADA, that we would be bringing them up to ADA standards? In those that we can't, we would do our very best to come as close as possible.
Correct. I think Nick's statement, what he means is that everything on a particular floor may not meet standards, but on that floor, standards will be met to the best of the ability that structure allows.
And that we should not build buildings that are not ADA accessible ever again going forward.
I don't think we can.
Well, you can't.
I know.
Yeah.
Legal.
I mean,
No, we can't and we should.
And we
to
should
the
not.
point, there are
Absolutely.
4 buildings that fully meet ADA standards now.
There's only 4 right now that fully meet.
Is that the four
The 4
new ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I because I've spent a large amount of time on that third floor of Roosevelt, and there may be other examples. That's the one that immediately, when you said that, popped into my head of, I just don't know. And I'm not an engineer or an architect, but I don't know in some cases, there's just not much room to do anything to put a.
And I think what I'm hearing from Nick Kent and from Kevin is that every bathroom on the third floor may not be ADA standard, but there will be at least one bathroom on the third floor that can meet it, or on the second floor where you can get to it. Right now, there's only one, and that's
In the
on
whole
first
building.
floor, in the
Correct.
entire building.
Yeah.
So there will be ADA standard work that is a vast improvement from where we are.
I don't think anybody should be misguided that this does what happened at Lincoln to a Washington, because that's a full modernization of the building.
I understand.
An important clarification. I appreciate that.
The level of transparency and thoroughness is appreciated.
Mhm.
60 million. We've heard what it will accomplish for ADA in elementary and high school, and all deferred maintenance at the elementary level, minus a few items that we have previously discussed. Any other board discussion or conversation on this before we take a look at? Okay. If I recall, we have read out our first. We want to bring our legal counsel up to explain this one, in terms of what exactly we're approving in terms of approval.
Initial resolution on top, right?
We will need an initial resolution, but we have already read that motion.
I'm saying that's what we've been.
Yes, the initial resolution.
Thank you. So this one I think is a little more straightforward in that I don't think you are, based on what I've heard thus far, I don't think there are going to be any amendments to the most recent versions of the initial resolution. and the referendum resolution. Whereas on the previous agenda item, you had changes to wording and also changes to the numbers. So here, however, the process is still the same. You would first approve the initial resolution, a motion to approve that initial resolution, and that would be the most recent version, which I'm not sure exactly when that was uploaded, but I know, I think this afternoon. And that includes the most recent language regarding the ADA standards. And so you would approve that initial resolution, and then you would approve the resolution to hold the referendum as you did with the previous item. So I think that's it.
It's straightforward. I think that just the caveat is just for clarity. And the language doesn't indicate that it's gonna, to Kevin's point, it's not 100% ADA standard, but the work and the money that is being requested in this resolution is to make the buildings ADA standard. That's what it's saying. It's not saying 100%, but it is saying that the work is, and that's different from the language from 2018, which talked about upgrades. The work that was done in 2018 was appropriate and met the language of that referendum. What we're suggesting is any ADA work that is done off of this referendum will be to make those buildings ADA standard.
I have a question. The language in the referendum though says ADA access compliance capital projects.
I think when we uploaded
Language
It
there's
says,
new,
is the new language in this handout you
in the handout,
Yes.
it says
Yes.
ADA facilities standards capital projects.
Yeah, that is the most recent language. It's the is ADA facilities standards. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was after, I will not pretend to be an ADA expert, but I know that was, I talked about this with my colleague, Renee Aldana, and I know she's.
so we had Ms. O'Donna work with Mr. Caro. We expressed what our intentions were, and this is the language that we came up with. Because that was always our intention. We wanted to be very transparent with what our goal is. That's the goal.
Any other board comments or questions? If not, I'm going to call the roll.
Wait, please. Thank you for waiting. So we had a motion.
To adopt the short form, the short.
Yeah, but the words are different on the handout than what is noticed.
I don't think that's accurate. I think
yeah.
Summers, we uploaded the new language that's also in front of the board.
No, I mean from what was noticed Friday. I know you put it up on board docs because I printed the stuff. Because I printed the stuff at the at the last minute. So I'm just worried that this is a lot of money and people are gonna be Rambo lawyering us. That used to be a phrase, right? The Rambo lawyer, and that we I'm trying to see what the difference in where the difference in language is. Yeah.
Was it up 2 hours?
Same from notice.
It was up 2 hours before, right? So that's the.
Right. To be clear, from so this meeting was properly noticed.
Okay.
Okay. And a more recent, or I guess a more recent and revised version of the proposed resolutions was put on board docs this afternoon, which is perfectly appropriate. I think you want to be sure that the motions are referencing that most recent version, which includes a change to the language regarding the ADA component and updates it to ADA facilities standards.
I will ask if the chair is willing to entertain a motion from me to amend to reflect the wording as stated this afternoon.
Most recent.
Yes, I'm.
And available on board docs.
Correct. And I think the point, I'm just going to try to just put it in plain English. You want to make sure that what you're adopting is the most recent, up-to-date version of both the initial resolution and of the referendum resolution, we'll call it.
For clarity, I will read it.
Sure, that is a great idea.
Initial,
move to amend as read.
initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $60 million. Be it resolved by the school board of the Wauwatosa School District, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, that there shall be issued pursuant to Chapter 67 of the Wisconsin statutes, general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $60 million for the purpose of paying the cost of school building and facility projects consisting of deferred maintenance and Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, facility standards, capital projects at Eisenhower, Madison, Roosevelt, Jefferson, and Washington elementary schools, and Montessori, Fisher, within the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA facility standards capital projects at Wauwatosa East and Wauwatosa West High Schools.
I move to amend as read.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any board discussion? I'm going to call a roll on the amendment.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, the amendment passes. We are back to the original motion as amended. May I have a motion?
It's already-
It's already been motioned. Any board discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And part 1 of 2 has been passed. We are now on to action to approve a resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of an initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in the amount not to exceed $60 million. May I have a motion noting that it's the amended resolution language?
It is recommended that the school board approve the amended resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of of the amended initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $60 million, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any board discussion? Again, what we did in the first is to say that we wanted to pursue this. What we are doing in the second is articulating that we will be placing it on the ballot in the November election.
And if I might add, just to clarify, that would include, it was stated as amended, and that's to include the most recent language regarding the ADA component. So just wanted to make that crystal clear for the record.
Thank you. Seeing no board questions or comments, Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. That motion as amended passes. I want to thank my board colleagues who have been taking a long time to discuss this. Reviewed a ton of information. I want to thank the district administration, legal counsel who is here tonight, members of the community who have advocated and pushed on a variety of different topics that have helped inform our thinking. The community has some significant decisions to make about what they want in their schools and demand in their schools going forward. This conversation and discussion about the future of Tosa schools is always in process, and I look forward to continuing to do this work with my colleagues on the board and our educators and district leadership. Dr. Means, thank you to you and your team. It is 10:05 p.m. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any board discussion? Just kidding. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.